Ladies and gentlemen, today we have a compilation video about every NFL franchise, so I hope you enjoy, and as per usual, today's video is presented to you by Prize Picks. Today we're going through every single NFL franchise and finding out what happened to their all-time passing leaders, starting with the Cardinals. In 1966, Jim Hart entered the NFL with almost no expectations. He went undrafted out of Southern Illinois and was buried 6th on the Cardinals quarterback depth chart, so the guy was basically an afterthought with a slim chance to make an impact. But then, history intervened. Because of the Vietnam War, the US Army drafted several players, including the Cardinals' then starting quarterback, Charlie Johnson. Him leaving created an opportunity, and Hart fought his way into the starting role. Head coach Don Coryell recognized Hart's arm talent and built an entire vertical passing offense around him. At the time, that approach was well ahead of its era, and it worked. Throughout the 1970s, Hart became the face of the Cardiac Cardinals, a team known for its dramatic finishes. In 1974, he led the NFC in completions and touchdown passes, while also beginning a streak of 4 consecutive Pro Bowl appearances. By the time his 18-year career with the Cardinals ended, Hart had thrown for 34,639 yards and 209 touchdowns. He went from forgotten 6th-string quarterback to the franchise's all-time passing leader. When Matt Ryan was drafted 3rd overall in 2008, the Falcons were in a crisis. The franchise was reeling from the Michael Vick dogfighting scandal and desperately needed stability, and Ryan delivered that immediately. His first NFL pass went for a 62-yard touchdown, setting the tone for what would become an outstanding career in Atlanta. He earned the nickname Matty Ice because of his composure under pressure, and over 14 seasons with the Falcons, he led 42 game-winning drives. Despite his regular season success, the playoffs always brought disappointment. A 24-2 loss against the Giants in the 2011 NFC wildcard game really had people questioning whether he could win when it mattered most. But in 2016, Ryan silenced a lot of the haters by winning MVP and leading one of the most explosive offenses in NFL history to the Super Bowl. Unfortunately, the Falcons' 28-3 collapse against Tom Brady and the Patriots became the defining moment of his career, even though the loss can't only be pinned on him. I do have to give him credit though, because he didn't let that brutal loss slow him down for long. He kept putting up elite numbers for years after that, although he never got back to the Super Bowl. With star receivers like Julio Jones and Roddy White, he built a historic resume in Atlanta. He finished his Falcons career with 59,735 passing yards and 367 touchdowns, and currently ranks 9th on the NFL's all-time passing list. When Joe Flacco was drafted by the Ravens, the team's identity was its defense. His initial role was simple: manage the game and avoid costly mistakes. Over time, Flacco was asked to do more. He possessed one of the strongest arms in the league and threw a great deep ball. Yet fans and analysts constantly debated whether he was truly elite or not. The 2012 postseason answered that question. Flacco threw 11 touchdowns without a single interception over 4 playoff games, and it ended with a Super Bowl victory. The defining play of that run was the Mile High Miracle, a 70-yard touchdown pass to Jacoby Jones against the Broncos that forced overtime and changed the course of the playoffs. In the offseason, the Ravens gave him a massive contract, and just like in many other cases, his production dropped over time until eventually Lamar Jackson replaced him. Flacco's regular season stats were good, they were just never exceptional. But when it mattered most, he was unstoppable. And I must say, it was awesome watching him step in on short notice for some of these other teams, like the Browns for example in 2023. Over his time with the Ravens, Flacco racked up 38,245 passing yards along with 212 touchdowns. Speaking of dominating, next up is Jim Kelly, and it's easy to forget that he actually didn't want to play in Buffalo due to the cold weather and the Bills being a smaller market team. He went to the USFL first with the Houston Gamblers, but when that league folded, he finally showed up to play for Buffalo in 1986. Kelly was the leader of a no-huddle attack that wore defenses down. The offense was fast, aggressive, and incredibly effective, and was a big part of how the Bills made 4 straight Super Bowls from 1990 to 1993. Kelly's toughness defined him. He played through brutal hits his entire career, lowering his shoulder into defenders instead of sliding, and he was as tough as they come. By the end of his 11-year career in Buffalo, he racked up 35,467 passing yards and 237 touchdowns. but he was tested way more off the field than on it. First, his infant son Hunter was diagnosed with Krabbe leukodystrophy, which is a fatal disease that affects the nervous system. Kelly started Hunter's Hope Foundation to fight the disease and help other families going through the same thing. Then years later, Kelly was diagnosed with oral cancer, beating that with the same toughness he'd showed on the field for his entire career. Cam Newton entered the NFL as a Heisman Trophy winner and national champion, and he immediately shattered rookie passing records.
Third down, here comes the blitz. Newton puts it up. He's got a man, and he completes it. Steve Smith is going all the way. Touchdown, Carolina.
The thing about Cam is he completely changed our perspective of what a quarterback could look like physically. He was 6'5", 245 pounds, and could run over linebackers, but don't get it twisted, his arm was elite too. His 2015 season was one of the best in NFL history. He won MVP, carried the Panthers to a 15-1 record, and they made it to the Super Bowl. His Superman celebrations and fearless style became iconic. But all that momentum was halted when Denver's defense completely shut him down in Super Bowl 50. There was that famous fumble where Cam didn't really give much effort to jump on it. After that, the narrative around him shifted. Unlike many modern quarterbacks who play well into their late 30s, Newton's career was shortened by the punishment he took. Injuries killed his prime, and a brief return to Carolina in 2021 ended with a 0-5 record as a starter. In his 10 total years with the Panthers, Newton threw for 29,725 yards and 186 touchdowns. Before we continue, I did mention earlier that this video was presented to you by Prize Picks. It's super simple how it all works. All you have to do is pick more or less on a couple player stats to have the chance to win. Last week, I ended up creating a lineup centered around Game 3 of the NBA Eastern Conference Finals, and all the guys did what we needed them to do. Donovan Mitchell scored 23 when we needed him to just get more than 19.5. Brunson put up 30 when we needed more than 20.5. Josh Hart finished with 12, which was under the 12.5 that we needed, and Cat made his 1 3-point shot, which was perfect. Now, I will say it's very nice when everything comes together and all hits at once, but that doesn't always happen, so always make sure to play responsibly and within your means to do so. Prize Picks is available in most states including California, Florida, and Texas, which is great, and they're going to give you $50 in lineups when you play your first $5 lineup, which means win or lose, you're going to get $50 free just for playing. So download the app now and use code HMA to get $50 in lineups with Prize Picks. Jay Cutler is probably a name you haven't heard in a while. This dude had one of the best arms in franchise history, and he's still at the top of the list in Chicago for passing yards by a wide margin.
He's going to take a shot, and Jeffrey has now broken free from Verrett and caught it and goes out of bounds.
It wasn't all sunshine and rainbows though. Cutler was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes in 2008. This required him to monitor his blood sugar and take insulin shots during games. Aside from dealing with extreme fatigue and losing a bunch of weight, it always felt like he had to put up with a ton from the media and even his teammates. The 2011 NFC Championship game against the Packers, he sprained his MCL and had to leave early. Everybody called him soft for not finishing out the game, which you don't really see with other quarterbacks. Trust me, the Bears didn't do any favors for Cutler either. Having him play behind awful offensive lines for years set him up for disaster. He was constantly hit hard, but he kept getting up, and even that wasn't enough for fans. They said he didn't show enough emotion and that he quit on the team. Sadly, during his 8 seasons in Chicago, the organization never fully built a contender around him. Cutler finished his Bears career with 23,443 passing yards and 154 touchdowns. Next, we're on to the Bengals' Ken Anderson, who was incredibly precise and smart. Bill Walsh, who was an assistant coach and the quarterback's coach at the time, built an early version of the West Coast offense around Anderson with short, high-percentage passes. This helped Anderson lead the NFL in passer rating 4 times and completion percentage 3 times throughout his career.
Anderson to throw. Touchdown! But a perfect strike to Isaac Curtis.
In 1981, he delivered the greatest season in Bengals history up to that point. He won the MVP and led Cincinnati to its first Super Bowl appearance. Ironically, they lost to the 49ers, who were coached by Bill Walsh, the same man who had helped shape Anderson's development years earlier. In 1982, Anderson completed 70.6% of his passes, setting an NFL record that stood for more tthan 25 years till Drew Brees broke it in 2011. Across 16 seasons with the Bengals, Anderson threw for 32,838 yards and 197 touchdowns. His resume is actually better than a lot of Hall of Famers, but he still hasn't gotten in. Brian Sipe was the 330th pick in the 1972 draft. He was selected in the 13th round and was widely viewed as too short, too slow, and lacking elite arm strength. Nobody expected him to become the leader of the franchise for any period of time, but Sipe turned a below-average roster at best into something special. In 1979, he led the league with 7 game-winning drives. Then in 1980, he added to that magic, leading 4 more game-winning drives and even winning MVP. Then came one of the coldest and most heartbreaking moments in franchise history. In a playoff game against the Raiders with wind chills making it feel -20, Cleveland was driving for a potential game-winning score. Sipe threw toward Ozzie Newsome in the end zone, but the pass was intercepted by Mike Davis with less than a minute remaining, ending the season in devastating fashion. Instead of opting for a field goal, they decided to risk passing, and it certainly backfired. After retiring, Sipe coached high school football in California and then became the quarterbacks coach at his former college, San Diego State. During his 10 seasons with the Browns, he threw for 23,713 yards and 154 touchdowns. Even though he did finish with 149 interceptions, I think it's safe to say he is still one of the greatest Cleveland quarterbacks in franchise history. Dak Prescott entered the NFL in 2016 as a 4th-round pick, expected to slowly develop behind Tony Romo. That plan quickly changed when Romo suffered a preseason back injury, forcing Prescott into the starting role. He hasn't looked back since. This guy has had a terrible time off the field. His mom died of colon cancer in 2013, then his older brother took his own life in 2020. Dak spoke out about his depression publicly after that, which you don't see too often, and I have to give him credit for that because a lot of men go through it, but it's usually just pushed down and never talked about. But on the field, he's consistently performed at a high level ever since he got the starting job. Although Dallas hasn't won a Super Bowl since the 1995 season and they always seem to choke in the playoffs, Prescott has produced like a top-tier quarterback when healthy, at least in the regular season. As of February 2026, he's thrown for 35,989 yards and 243 touchdowns over 10 years with the Cowboys, and it seems like he still has plenty left in the tank. John Elway's career began with drama before he ever took an NFL snap. The Baltimore Colts selected him 1st overall in the 1983 draft, but Elway refused to play for them and threatened to pursue a professional baseball career instead, so the Colts traded him to Denver. Elway had one of the strongest arms anyone had ever seen. I mean, the guy could throw a baseball 93 miles per hour, so that should tell you everything you need to know. On the football field, he made throws nobody else could make. Towards the beginning of his career, he was dragging bad Broncos teams to Super Bowls in the 80s, but he consistently fell short when it mattered most. Then in Super Bowl 32, that changed. The Broncos got their first ring. Elway was 37 years old, and you could see how determined he was to finally win it all. The play where he put his body on the line, diving headfirst to convert a 3rd and 6, is one of the most famous moments in NFL history. That play summed up his determination and was the perfect example of his heart. The Broncos won again the next year, and Elway retired on top. When it was all said and done, Elway threw for 51,475 yards and 300 touchdowns over 16 years with Denver. Later, he became the Broncos general manager and even convinced Peyton Manning to sign with them. Brought them yet another Super Bowl ring in the 2015 season. Next up, we've got Matthew Stafford, and he's close to being the first player on our list to lead 2 different teams in passing. The Lions drafted him 1st overall in 2009 after going 0-16 the year before. This franchise was desperate for hope. He played through separated shoulders, broken bones, and countless hits in order to keep Detroit competitive. For 12 years, he put up huge numbers in the regular season, but the Lions never won a playoff game. Stafford never blamed anybody, not his coaches, not his teammates, not the organization. He just kept playing. 2021, both sides knew it was time to move on. The Lions traded him to the Rams, and in his first season with LA, Stafford led a game-winning drive in the final minutes of Super Bowl 56.
Pass. Got it. Touchdown.
After he won, a lot of Lions fans celebrated like it was their own championship because they had so much respect for the guy. Stafford threw for 45,109 yards and 282 touchdowns throughout his 12 years in Detroit. And as of early 2026, he ranks 6th all-time on the career passing yards list with 64,516. After an uninspiring rookie season in Atlanta, Brett Favre was traded to Green Bay. What followed was one of the most electrifying careers in NFL history. Favre was fearless to the point where he was almost too reckless. He thrived on tight window throws and emotional highs. After becoming the Packers starter in 1992, he transformed the franchise into a powerhouse. He won 3 consecutive MVP awards from 1995 through 1997 and led Green Bay to a Super Bowl win in the 1996 season. But behind the scenes, Favre was battling a Vicodin addiction and entered rehab multiple times while still performing at an elite level. One of the most memorable moments of his career came in 2003 when he played on Monday Night Football the day after his father's sudden death. Favre threw 4 touchdown passes in the first half alone in a very emotional performance. The other crazy thing about Favre is that Iron Man streak. He started 297 consecutive games, or 321 if you include the playoffs. It's going to be a long time before anybody gets close to that, and to be honest, I don't know if that will ever be broken. Towards the end of his career, things got messy though. He kept retiring and unretiring, and he left Green Bay on bad terms to play for the Jets and the Vikings. Some off-field scandals hurt his legacy a bit too, but ultimately he's remembered as one of the best players to ever do it. He threw for 61,655 yards and 442 touchdowns over 16 years in Green Bay. Across his entire career, he accumulated 71,838 passing yards, which currently ranks 4th all time. In 2007, Matt Schaub came to Houston after a trade with Atlanta. This was when the Texans were still recovering from the David Carr expansion era. They needed stability, and Schaub gave them exactly that. Nobody really expected it at the time, but he actually turned the offense around to the point where they finished top 10 multiple years. In fact, in 2009, he led the NFL in passing yards with 4,770. The 2012 season marked the peak of his time with the Texans. Houston started 11-1 behind a dominant defense led by J.J. Watt, who recorded 20.5 sacks. Arian Foster led the league in rushing touchdowns with 15, and Andre Johnson produced one of the best seasons of his career with 1,598 yards from scrimmage. Schaub threw for over 4,000 passing yards for the 3rd time in his career and earned his 2nd Pro Bowl selection, although the team did fall short in the playoffs against New England. Then in 2013, everything fell apart. Schaub threw a pick 6 in 4 consecutive games, setting a crazy NFL record. The fans turned on him hard, even cheering when he suffered an ankle injury in their Week 6 game against the Rams. But he handled his demotion quietly and never caused problems in the locker room. In total for Houston, Schaub threw for 23,221 yards and 124 touchdowns over 7 seasons. You have to remember that this franchise has only been around since 2002, so this record is bound to be broken sooner rather than later. Maybe CJ Stroud is the guy that's going to do it. Peyton Manning fundamentally changed how quarterbacks operated at the line of scrimmage. He would control games before the snap, diagnose defenses, and audible with his trademark hand signals.
Take flood left! Flood left! 50's Mike! Flood left!
It started way back, kind of, I guess, around my 2nd year with Tom Moore. We kind of sat down and just put some code words together and things that kind of made sense, but it has taken off from that.
During his 13 seasons in Indianapolis, Manning won 4 MVP awards and delivered a Super Bowl championship in the 2006 season. Before he arrived, Indy was known for basketball and racing, but he reshaped the city's sports identity. Unfortunately, in 2011, he needed multiple neck surgeries, which destroyed his throwing motion. He threw passes in secret during the lockout, but they wobbled and nosedived. A lot of people thought his career was over, including his own brother Eli. So the Colts had a decision to make. Instead of sticking with Manning, they released him and drafted Andrew Luck. Of course, as most of you should know, Manning signed with Denver, where he set the single-season touchdown record in 2013 with 55 and grabbed another MVP, not to mention another Super Bowl win. But even if you take away those Broncos years and just look at his Colts stats, Peyton threw for 54,828 yards and 399 touchdowns in 13 years. Now add on his Broncos stats, and he currently sits third all-time in career passing yards with 71,940. Mark Brunell came to Jacksonville in the team's first ever trade in 1995, so he was tasked with giving the city its football identity. Brunell was mobile, creative, and capable of extending plays with his legs, which made him pretty tough to deal with. His best season was in 1996, where he led the entire league with 4,367 yards passing. The Jaguars were only in their second year as a franchise, but Brunell led them to an upset win over Denver in the playoffs, and they made it as far as the AFC Championship game. Brunell eventually injured his elbow in 2003 and was replaced by Byron Leftwich, and that was pretty much the end of his time with Jacksonville. Brunell played 17 years in the NFL, 9 of which being for the Jags. He got a Super Bowl ring as a backup to Drew Brees in New Orleans in 2009, but he'll always be remembered for his time in Jacksonville, where he threw for 25,698 yards and 144 touchdowns. With Trevor Lawrence still early in his career, Brunell's franchise record might not last much longer. The all-time passing leader for the Chiefs is none other than Patrick Mahomes, and it's going to be a long time before anybody comes close to him. Mahomes didn't grow up in quarterback camps, he grew up in Major League Baseball clubhouses. His dad was a journeyman MLB pitcher, so Mahomes spent his childhood watching guys like Derek Jeter handle pressure like it was routine. Clearly that translated into his own game, because when Mahomes is sprinting sideways, flicking a sidearm throw across his body, it doesn't look chaotic, it looks rehearsed. He throws like a shortstop turning a double play. Weird arm angles, sidearm lasers, no-look passes, everything they tell quarterbacks not to do.
Pressure now on Mahomes. He's in trouble. Now gets it away. Are you kidding me?
During his first year as a starter in 2018, he threw 50 touchdowns and won MVP. There was no adjustment period, no slow climb, it was just instant dominance. By the age of 29, he already had 6 Pro Bowls, 3 Super Bowl rings, and 2 MVP awards. He was chasing Tom Brady's legacy faster than anyone thought was possible. Then in week 15 of the 2025 season, disaster struck. Mahomes tore his ACL, and for the first time of his career, the Chiefs missed the playoffs. Suddenly, everybody is asking if the Chiefs dynasty is dead rather than if Mahomes will become the GOAT. The good news for Kansas City fans is that Brady also tore his ACL at the beginning of his 30s and went on to win 4 more Super Bowls, so there is a chance. Through 9 seasons so far, Mahomes has thrown for 35,939 yards and 267 touchdowns, and if history says anything, he's not close to being done. Derek Carr arrived into a very unstable situation when the Raiders drafted him in 2014. He was put through the ringer. Coaching changes, front office drama, off-field scandals, from the Henry Ruggs tragedy to the John Gruden fallout, Carr was there through it all. In 2016, everything finally felt different. He orchestrated a bunch of fourth quarter comebacks with 7 game-winning drives, and the Raiders actually looked like contenders. That is until Christmas Eve when Carr broke his leg, and that effectively killed Oakland's chances. When the team moved to Las Vegas, he was the face of that transition, but it didn't last long because after nearly a decade of loyalty, he was benched late in the 2022 season and released. Carr threw for 35,222 yards and 217 touchdowns over 9 years with the Raiders. Aside from filling in for the Colts when they were desperate during the 2025 season, Philip Rivers is also the all-time passing leader for the Chargers organization. Originally selected by the Giants 4th overall in 2004, Rivers was immediately sent to the Chargers because Eli Manning refused to play for the team. That worked out fine for San Diego though, because Rivers became one of the best quarterbacks in the league. In 2006, his first year as the starter, he led the team to a 14-2 record while having the #1 scoring offense. Then from 2008 up until 2020, Rivers only had 1 year where he didn't reach at least 4,000 passing yards. He was a consistently accurate quarterback during his prime. Chargers fans loved him, and he had extreme passion for the game. After originally retiring in 2021, he coached St. Michael Catholic High School football before making a brief return to action in 2025 like we stated earlier. With the Chargers, Rivers threw for 59,271 yards and 397 touchdowns over 16 years. And in total, he accumulated 63,984 yards, which puts him 8th on the all-time list. Before Matthew Stafford, before the recent Super Bowl run, the Rams passing king was Jim Everett. Everett entered the league with huge expectations coming out of Purdue. He was actually drafted by Houston, but they traded him to the Rams that year because they weren't able to figure out a contract that worked for both parties. Also, the Oilers had Warren Moon already, so it didn't really make sense. In 1988 and 89, Everett led the league in touchdown passes. He was easily one of the best vertical passers in the league at that point. But in the 1989 NFC Championship game against the 49ers, the Rams were destroyed 30-3. Everett took a brutal beating, and at one point he collapsed without being touched. The media called it a phantom sack. That single moment destroyed his reputation. People instantly questioned his toughness and ignored all the hits he'd taken before that. In 1994, during an interview, Jim Rome repeatedly mocked him, calling him Chris Everett, referring to the female tennis player. Everett snapped and flipped the table on live television.
I think that you probably won't say it again.
I bet I do.
Okay.
Chris?
The clip went viral before viral was even a thing, and that moment pretty much overshadowed everything he'd done on the football field. Everett tried to rebuild his career in New Orleans and San Diego, having some success, but never getting back to that Pro Bowl level that he was at during the late 80s with the Rams. Looking back at his stats with LA, he threw for 23,758 yards and 142 touchdowns over 8 years. Dan Marino should have gone higher in the 1983 draft. The fact that he fell to 27th overall gave him a huge chip on his shoulder, which he carried for his entire career. Marino had one of the fastest releases anybody had ever seen. Defensive linemen really struggled to get to him because he would just zip the ball out of there before they could sack him.
Marino, deep drop, throwing deep upfield down the near side, man open, touchdown!
In 1984, just his second year in the league, he had one of the most impressive seasons in NFL history. He threw for 5,084 yards and 48 touchdowns with 17 interceptions. The Dolphins made the Super Bowl that year, but unfortunately they lost and Marino never got back. Miami rarely surrounded him with great defense or a great running game, so he was forced to keep them in playoff contention through sheer talent. Marino is the greatest quarterback to never win a Super Bowl. He played with Miami for his entire 17-year career and threw for 61,361 yards and 420 touchdowns. Now we're going old school with Fran Tarkenton. His dad was a Methodist minister, so he grew up super disciplined. Drafted in 1961, Tarkenton came off the bench in his first game against the Bears, throwing for 250 yards and 4 touchdowns, along with running in another. Tarkenton wasn't big, he didn't have a cannon for an arm, so he basically invented the idea of a scrambling quarterback out of necessity, which helped him survive behind terrible offensive lines. His style drove defensive linemen crazy, but it worked. There's a famous play against the 49ers where he ran all over the field for what feels like forever for completing a crazy tipped pass. That one play pretty much summed up how he played.
Finally. No, still scrambling. Now he throws. Almost intercepted and deflected into the arms of Preston Carpenter.
Giants traded for him in his prime, and he made the Pro Bowl 4 times in 5 seasons with them. Then Minnesota brought him back years later to pair him with the Purple People Eaters defense, and in 1975 he won the league MVP. Tarkenton and Minnesota made 3 Super Bowls. Sadly, they lost all 3 of them, but he is still one of the best quarterbacks to ever play. Maybe his most impressive stat is that even though he weighed 190 pounds, he barely ever missed a game. When he retired, he owned every major passing record. He threw for 33,098 yards and 239 touchdowns over 13 years with Minnesota. Next, we've got the Patriots, and the passing leader is obviously Tom Brady. We all know the story. He fell to pick 199 in the 2000 draft because he was slow as hell and didn't look like much coming out of Michigan. But that draft slide fueled him for 2 decades. Early on, people called him a game manager, but that narrative flipped in 2007 when he threw 50 touchdowns and ran one of the most explosive offenses the league had ever seen. As time went on, Brady fought off aging with his crazy diet and training. This helped him stay elite into his mid-40s.
That will to win is the highest out of anybody in the NFL. That's by far the thing that separates him the most.
In 2020, he left New England and immediately won a Super Bowl in Tampa Bay, which solidified him as the GOAT even more than his total number of rings did, which was 7 by the way. Up until that point with the Bucs, it was hard to separate his greatness from Bill Belichick. One of the things Brady doesn't get enough credit for is how he took pay cuts for his entire career so that the Patriots could build better rosters around him. And I think it's honestly crazy that you don't see more quarterbacks doing this today to potentially improve their legacy. With New England, Brady threw for 74,571 yards and 541 touchdowns over 20 years. And he is also number one on our list today for all-time passing yards with 89,214 total. Next up is another guy from the golden era of quarterbacks, Drew Brees. He played in San Diego first, but is definitely most known for being in New Orleans. People doubted him because of his height, and the Chargers drafted Phillip Rivers to eventually replace him. Then in the final game of 2005, Brees tore up his shoulder. Some doctors thought his career might even be over. The Dolphins actually had a chance to grab him in free agency, but their doctors thought the risk was too high. That decision led to him being on the Saints at a time when New Orleans was still recovering from Hurricane Katrina. A broken quarterback arrived to save a broken city. Brees and head coach Sean Payton built one of the most efficient offenses the NFL had ever seen, and Brees poured millions of dollars into rebuilding schools and parks in New Orleans through the Brees Dream Foundation. On the field, he became one of the best quarterbacks in history, leading the league in passing yards 7 different times along with throwing for over 5,000 yards in 4 seasons. But his best moment had to be in 2009 when the Saints won the Super Bowl. Brees broke the career passing yards and touchdown records and was arguably the most accurate passer in NFL history. Unfortunately, just like some of these other quarterbacks, Brees never made it back to the Super Bowl after his first ring. The end of his career had some brutal playoff losses, but he always handled them really well. When you total up his stats for the Saints, he had 68,010 yards and 491 touchdowns over 15 years. He's also second all-time behind Brady in passing yards with 80,358 total. Then we're on to the Giants and Eli Manning. Similar to Elway, he refused to play for the Chargers when they drafted him first overall in 2004, forcing a trade to New York. And obviously the pressure was insane, but he handled it with that goofy, blank expression that made him look unbothered no matter what was happening. Eli threw a lot of interceptions. He was super inconsistent, and he finished his career with a dead-even 50% win rate in the regular season. But in the playoffs, he turned into a completely different player and was clutch as hell. Some of the most amazing highlights you'll ever see are Eli ripping apart the Patriots in the Super Bowl. Like in Super Bowl 42, for example, when he escaped the pocket and threw a prayer downfield just for David Tyree to haul in one of the most iconic catches in NFL history. 4 years later, he beat the Patriots yet again in the Super Bowl with the help of a perfect sideline throw to Mario Manningham.
4-man rush. Eli throwing into traffic on the sideline. They're going to rule it a catch by Manningham.
It wasn't until week 13 of the 2017 season that the Giants benched him and broke his streak of 210 consecutive starts, which crushed him and really didn't make too much sense. In total with the Giants over 16 years, Eli threw for 57,023 yards and 366 touchdowns. But I'm sure all that matters to him is that he is Tom Brady's dad, winning those 2 Super Bowls against him in epic fashion. It really shows how bad the Jets are because we have to go way back to Joe Namath for their passing leader. And unlike some of these other teams with older quarterbacks on our list, he really didn't throw for that many yards, at least compared to the others that we talked about today. He signed a record rookie contract in 1965 and became the face of the AFL immediately. Namath had one of the quickest releases anybody had ever seen, and in 1967 he became the first quarterback ever to throw for 4,000 yards in a single season. Broadway Joe wore fur coats and white cleats, he lived the nightlife, and he changed what it meant to be an athlete. Of course, he had that famous moment before Super Bowl III where he said the Jets would beat the heavily favored Colts.
I think we got a heck of a shot of winning. We'll beat anybody in the world, and I think we're going to win next Sunday.
His coach was furious, but Namath backed it up. He had 206 yards passing against the Colts defense and outplayed Johnny Unitas. Unfortunately, Namath's knees were in bad shape. He pretty much had no cartilage left and played most of his career in constant pain, basically unable to move very well in the pocket. Despite that, he still threw for 27,057 yards and 170 touchdowns with the Jets over 13 years. The Eagles drafted Donovan McNabb second overall in 1999, but Philly fans booed him on draft day because they wanted Ricky Williams instead. In hindsight though, what a pick. McNabb had a strong arm and could run really well, which helped him lead the Eagles to 5 NFC Championship games. In 2002, he played on a broken ankle for nearly an entire game against the Cardinals and threw 4 touchdowns, which showed how tough he really was. He made it to 1 Super Bowl and threw for 357 yards and 3 touchdowns, but like a lot of guys on this list, he couldn't quite beat the Patriots. That was in 2004 when McNabb and Terrell Owens had an incredible season together. Philadelphia fans love the city's blue-collar toughness. McNabb, on the other hand, was more laid back. That clash never really went away, even though he held a ton of franchise records. In 2010, the Eagles traded him to the Redskins, and for a while there was a lot of tension. But McNabb eventually softened his relationship with Philly, and he's now in the team's Hall of Fame. He threw for 32,873 yards and 216 touchdowns over 11 years with the Eagles. Next up, we've got Ben Roethlisberger with the Steelers, and this guy played like it was backyard football, shrugging off defenders to extend plays all over the place. He won his first 13 starts as a rookie, then became the youngest quarterback to win a Super Bowl at just 23 years old in his second season. Roethlisberger played through broken noses, sprained shoulders, and torn knee cartilage for years. He was incredibly tough. The biggest moment of his career came in Super Bowl 43, a game that is probably one of the best Super Bowls in recent memory. It went back and forth, and Larry Fitzgerald looked like he had just won it for the Cardinals.
Warner has time. Fitzgerald into Steeler territory. 30, 20, 10. Arizona has the lead.
Then Roethlisberger led a perfect drive and threw an incredible touchdown pass to Santonio Holmes in the back corner of the end zone.
Last time. Throws to the back of the end zone, and it is caught for a touchdown.
Roethlisberger evolved from a physical player into a volume passer as his career went on. He led the league in passing yards twice while in his 30s, and it still feels like people don't give him the credit that he deserves. In total, over 18 years with Pittsburgh, he threw for 64,088 yards and 418 touchdowns. Alright, let's take a look at the 49ers now with Joe Montana as their all-time leader. It's crazy to think that he went in the 3rd round of the 1979 draft. Teams thought his arm wasn't strong enough and he lacked the typical quarterback build. Their head coach at the time, Bill Walsh, saw something different though. Montana's footwork and processing were perfect for the West Coast offense. Montana was just insanely calm under pressure. There's that famous moment where before the game-winning drive in Super Bowl 23, he pointed out John Candy in the crowd to lighten the mood in the huddle. There are just so many legendary moments with Montana, but it's hard to beat the catch.
Looking, throwing in the end zone.
Obviously, he went 4-0 in Super Bowls, which is pretty crazy as far as stats go, but perhaps the stat that best shows how cool he really was is the fact that he never threw an interception in any of those games. Eventually, of course, the 49ers traded for Steve Young, which created the most famous quarterback controversy in NFL history. Montana essentially lost his job because of an elbow injury, then he asked for a trade and the 49ers sent him to Kansas City. Right off the bat, Montana took the Chiefs to the AFC Championship game in his first season with the team. But clearly he's most remembered for his time in San Francisco. In total, he threw for 35,124 yards and 244 touchdowns over 13 years with the 49ers. Another guy who got looked over in the draft was Russell Wilson, picked in the 3rd round of 2012. Teams thought he was too short to see over offensive linemen, but he won the starting job as a rookie with an insane preseason where he was just ripping everyone apart. In just his 2nd season, the Seahawks won Super Bowl 48. The next year, they were right back in the big game. The Seahawks were on the 1-yard line against the Patriots, where 99 times out of 100, the Seahawks probably win this game if they just run the ball. Instead, Wilson threw an interception and the dynasty was over in one play. That moment right there created a rift between Wilson and the Legion of Boom defense, and the tension never really went away. Wilson could extend plays better than almost anyone. He'd spin away from pass rushers and launch deep balls downfield, but later in his career, Wilson wanted more control of the offense. Even fans started the "Let Russ Cook" movement. That was until his polished public image started to rub people the wrong way, and in 2022, the Seahawks traded him to Denver. Wilson holds every major passing record in Seahawks history, and until the 2025 season, he brought them their only Super Bowl win. He threw for 37,059 yards and 292 touchdowns over 10 years with Seattle. The Buccaneers drafted Jameis Winston first overall in 2015. He had a huge arm and a ton of charisma, but Winston was really inconsistent. Sure, he could make any throw on the field, but he also made crazy decisions all the time. In 2019, Winston threw 33 touchdowns and 30 interceptions, making him the first player to ever join the 30-30 club, and he's still the only member to this day. He also threw 7 pick sixes that season. So in other words, he was the team's best offensive weapon and the biggest liability at the same time. Winston's teammates loved him though. He had infectious energy and never stopped competing. He played through hits and kept fighting even when it got him in trouble. Eventually in 2020, Tampa Bay let him walk in free agency, and ever since then he's been a plug-and-play guy when teams need him. While he was on the Bucs, Winston threw for 19,737 yards and 121 touchdowns over 5 years. Then we're on to Warren Moon, who won the Rose Bowl at Washington. But back then, a lot of executives held racist views about black quarterbacks, and there was pressure for him to change positions. Moon refused to switch to wide receiver or even defensive back, so he went to the Canadian Football League instead, where he won 5 straight Grey Cup championships with the Edmonton Eskimos. After all that time, the NFL finally took notice. Moon signed with the Houston Oilers in 1984 and ran the run-and-shoot offense. He had one of the most beautiful throwing motions anyone had ever seen. In 1990, he won Offensive Player of the Year, passing for 4,689 yards and proving he could dominate at the highest level. Unfortunately, he never got a shot at the Super Bowl. His best chance came in the 1992 playoffs, but the Oilers blew a massive lead to the Bills in what was then the biggest comeback in NFL history. In 2006, Moon became the first black quarterback inducted into the Hall of Fame. He threw for 33,685 yards and 196 touchdowns over 10 years with the Oilers. Did you know that Joe Theismann actually changed how his last name was pronounced at Notre Dame? He made it rhyme with Heisman to campaign for the trophy. Miami drafted him in the 4th round, and he's another guy who went to the CFL first. When he came back, he was a punt returner before finally becoming the starter. Once he got the job, Theismann turned into the leader of an iconic Washington team and used his mobility to dominate the NFC. Washington won the Super Bowl in 1982. Then the next year, Theismann won MVP and took them back to another Super Bowl. Sadly, on Monday Night Football in 1985, Lawrence Taylor sacked him, completely shattering his leg on national television, and that was pretty much a wrap for his career. That moment also changed how teams valued the left tackle position. Protecting the quarterback's blind side became way more important after that incident. Theismann transitioned into broadcasting after football, and he threw for 25,206 yards and 160 touchdowns with Washington over 12 years. So that's every franchise's all-time passing leader. A few of them changed the game, some survived bad organizations, and a couple are only there because nobody better has shown up yet. From 3-time MVPs to guys who you may not even remember at all, today we're going through every NFL team's all-time rushing leader, starting with the Arizona Cardinals. Or I guess I should say St. Louis Cardinals, because that's where they were located when Otis Anderson played for them. He was a workhorse out of Miami who racked up carries and stayed healthy when a lot of other backs couldn't. His rookie year in 1979, he ran for 1,605 yards, won Offensive Rookie of the Year, made the Pro Bowl, and earned first-team All-Pro honors. He even had 1,913 yards from scrimmage. You can't ask for a much better start than that. Eventually, though, injuries caught up with him. His explosiveness faded in 1985, and by 1986, he was averaging just 3.1 yards per carry. In the middle of that season, he was traded to the Giants. A lot of guys would have been done right there, but Anderson reinvented himself and did not give up. He became a short yardage specialist, then worked his way back into a lead role by 1989, even scoring 14 rushing touchdowns. In Super Bowl 25, he ran for 102 yards and a touchdown, controlling the clock along the way and ultimately winning Super Bowl MVP. With the Cardinals, though, over 8 years, he finished with 1,858 attempts, 7,999 yards, and 46 rushing touchdowns. Gerald Riggs was built to punish you. He was a downhill runner who set the tone every game he played in. By the 4th quarter, defenses were completely worn down trying to tackle him. By 1984, Atlanta's offense was completely built around him. When you needed tough yardage and someone to grind out possessions, Riggs was your answer. He wasn't flashy, but he was extremely reliable and physical. His best year was 1985 when he put up 1,986 yards from scrimmage and made second team All-Pro. But the wear and tear of being a feature back in the 80s hit him hard. From 1984 through 1987, he carried the ball 1,296 times, and after that, he was never the same. He finished his career in Washington, but in total with Atlanta over 7 years, he ran for 6,631 yards on 1,587 carries with 48 rushing touchdowns. And quickly before we do move on, I just want to mention that Bijan Robinson is already at nearly 4,000 rushing yards in only 3 years, so Riggs might be in trouble with this record pretty soon. Jamal Lewis was an absolute beast in the early 2000s who could run through almost any arm tackle and always kept his legs churning. The Ravens built their identity on defense, but Lewis was the offensive counterpunch. He was the guy that would control the tempo and close out the game when you needed him to.
Ozzie Newsome's on the phone, and Ozzie told me, he said, "Hey, what did you tell me when you came up here to visit?" And I told him I would be as good or better than any back in the AFC North.
In 2003, he had the kind of season that people will never forget. Lewis ran for 2,066 yards and set the Ravens' single-season rushing record. At the time, he was just the 5th player in NFL history to run for over 2,000 yards in a season. Following that historic year, Lewis began to progress back to around 1,000 yards per year, and by 2007, Baltimore let him walk. In a surprising turn of events, he ended up signing with the Browns, the Ravens' AFC North rival. Lewis made it known that that decision to let him walk away was a mistake, as he won Comeback Player of the Year and totaled over 1,500 yards from scrimmage in his first year with Cleveland. While he was with the Ravens, though, he ran for 7,801 yards on 1,822 carries and scored 45 rushing touchdowns in 6 years. Thurman Thomas was a complete offensive weapon. He's the perfect example of an older running back who would likely still dominate in today's game. In his prime, Buffalo's offense was all about speed and tempo, and Thomas was the focal point. If you stayed in a base 4-3 or 3-4 defense, he would rip you up on the ground, and if you went lighter, he would punish linebackers in coverage. There wasn't a safe answer.
Set now. Thomas again.
There was a period from 1989 to 1992 where he led the entire league in scrimmage yards for 4 years straight, including an MVP year in 1991. By the time he was done in Buffalo after the 1999 season, he'd carried the ball more than any other Bills player in history.
41-yard line, Kelly dumps it off to Thurman Thomas, and here's Thurman Thomas exploiting a huge hole.
Here's Kelly shotgunning a running play. Thurman Thomas breaks it up to 25, still on his feet at the 20. Thurman Thomas has broken a 31-yard touchdown run.
He finished as a backup in Miami, but during his time in Buffalo, he ran for 11,938 yards on 2,849 carries with 65 rushing touchdowns. The Panthers' all-time rushing leader is Jonathan Stewart, which is kind of impressive because he shared a lot of carries with D'Angelo Williams, who happens to sit at number 2. In fact, Stewart only had 3 seasons in his entire career where he carried the ball over 200 times. Carolina needed someone who could get 4 yards on command. Stewart was built for that job.
Stewart, running room to the end zone, touchdown, Jonathan Stewart.
When the offense stalled, he was the guy who could turn dead plays into positive runs. The spotlight wasn't always on him, but his physicality made the run game work throughout the season, and you always had to respect it. After 10 years with the Panthers, Stewart finished out his career backing up Saquon Barkley on the Giants in 2018. He finished with 7,318 yards on 1,699 carries and 51 rushing touchdowns with the Panthers. Walter Payton is one of the most iconic running backs of all time. He could do everything: run through you, catch passes, and even throw when you needed to spice things up. He earned the nickname Sweetness at Jackson State, where he ran for 3,563 yards. And in the NFL, he gave that same production on a bigger stage.
First time I saw him on television, I didn't know who he was. And I saw him make this one run. And I said, oh my goodness. What kind of animal is this? What kind of guy is this?
He had so many amazing games, but I think his best was against the Vikings in 1977. What makes it even more impressive is that he had the flu and a 101-degree fever. Didn't matter though. He still ran for 275 yards, setting an NFL record that lasted over 22 years. Peyton had that awesome, unique style of running, the stutter step, the stiff arm, and that never die mentality where he refused to go down easy on any run. The 1985 Bears won the Super Bowl with him, but one of the craziest things about that run is that Peyton didn't score a single postseason touchdown that year. Mike Ditka said it was one of his biggest regrets not trying to get him into the end zone during Super Bowl 20. Peyton played his entire 13-year career with the Bears and ran for 16,726 yards on 3,838 carries with 110 rushing touchdowns. Now this is a name that you might remember from the late 90s and early 2000s, Corey Dillon. He was one of the most consistent running backs in the league for a while, especially in Cincinnati. And it's fitting that he's right behind Walter Payton because on October 22nd, 2000, he ran for 278 yards and 2 touchdowns against Denver, breaking Payton's single-game rushing record. That game right there really put Dillon on the map. He often felt like the best and most reliable piece of the offense, even when everything around him was kind of crazy. He carried the workload on some really bad Bengals teams as well. It appeared that after the 2003 season that Dillon was slowing down, so Cincinnati traded him to New England. Little did they know he was about to run for 1,635 yards in 2004 and win a Super Bowl. For the Bengals though, over 7 years, he finished with 8,061 yards on 1,865 carries and 45 rushing touchdowns. Now to a player that some fans still call the running back GOAT. Jim Brown ran like every defender had personally disrespected him and was flat out amazing to watch. For me, in highlight reels, because clearly I wasn't alive in the 1960s.
Faster than a speeding bullet. More powerful than a locomotive. Able to leap tall buildings in a single bound.
He led the league in rushing yards in 8 of his 9 NFL seasons. He won 3 MVP awards. He averaged 104.3 rushing yards per game over his entire career, which is still the best all time, and finished with 5.2 yards per carry. In 1963 specifically, he ran for 1,863 yards and set a franchise record that still feels untouchable to this day.
I thought he was going to be a great back. It turns out that he's the greatest running back of all time.
And then he walked away. At 30 years old, while still playing some of his best football, he retired to get into acting. Most guys fade out of the league, but Jim Brown left when he was still at the top. It's just crazy looking back at some of his highlights where it's beyond obvious who the best player on the entire field is. He ran for 12,312 yards on 2,359 carries with 106 rushing touchdowns. Emmitt Smith wasn't the flashiest runner you'll ever see, but he was relentless. With the help of great vision and balance, he could squeeze out yards on plays that looked totally dead. From 1992 to 1995, Smith led the NFL in total touchdowns 3 different times. And throughout his career, he also led the league in rushing yards 4 times. That includes his insane 1993 season where he won NFL MVP, the Super Bowl, and Super Bowl 28 MVP all in the same year.
I watched him basically beat the Giants single-handedly with his shoulder going out of its socket.
All that hard work and resilience led to October 27, 2002. When Smith experienced his most magical moment on a football field, passing Walter Payton for the NFL rushing record. During his 13 years with the Cowboys, he ran for 17,162 yards on 4,052 carries with 153 rushing touchdowns. But despite what most people remember, he didn't actually finish out his career on the Cowboys. Instead, he spent 2 years with the Cardinals before hanging up the cleats for good. Smith had insane longevity, but Terrell Davis was quite the opposite. But when he was healthy, he was one of the best backs in NFL history. When even the tiniest gap would open up, he would hit it fast, and he was known for making one cut and finishing strong.
Davis, room, daylight. This could get ugly. Langham gets him. Not soon enough.
He was a 6th round draft pick who entered training camp as the 6th string running back. He made the roster for being a part of their coverage unit on special teams, then got promoted to starting running back for week number 1. In 1997, he set the record for most total touchdowns in a single postseason with 8. Then the very next year, he ran for 2,008 yards and won league MVP. Denver also won Super Bowl 33, and Davis was at his absolute peak. Unfortunately, he tore his ACL and MCL in 1999. Then he tried to come back for years, but it didn't work, and he ended up retiring during the 2002 preseason. In total, over 7 years with the Broncos, he ran for 7,607 yards on 1,655 carries with 60 touchdowns. Then there's Barry Sanders, the guy who made people miss in ways that didn't even make sense. He would cut on a dime, and defenders would just fly past him like they didn't know where he went.
First down at the 20 for Scott Mitchell. Barry Sanders, the single setback, 3 yards away from his 10th straight game over 100. Barry gets the call. He's to the 25, 30, off to the races, 40, 50, 40, down the right sideline, high stepping a bit to the 20, to the 15, to the 10, to the 5, touchdown.
Barry had one of the craziest seasons of all time in college. He had 2,734 yards from scrimmage and 37 touchdowns in 11 games and won the Heisman Trophy in 1988. With the Lions, he was one of the best players in the league right from the start. In just his second year, he led the league in rushing and went on to do that 4 total times throughout his career. But his best season came when he was 29 years old. In 1997, he ran for 2,053 yards, shared the league MVP with Brett Favre, and finished the year with 14 straight 100-yard games. Then in 1999, at 31 years old, Sanders retired out of nowhere. He was only 1,457 yards short of tying Walter Payton's all-time record. The main reason for leaving was that he was frustrated with the Lions' direction and front office, and you can't really blame him. During his 10 years there, Detroit only won 1 single playoff game. Sanders ran for 15,269 yards on 3,062 carries with 99 touchdowns. For Green Bay, the leading rusher is Ahman Green, a guy who had legendary straight line speed and had the longest run in the NFL back-to-back years in 2003 and 2004. Seattle drafted him in 1998, then traded him to Green Bay in 2000 because they were worried about his fumbling issues. That change of scenery helped him turn into a star, making 4 Pro Bowls with the Packers. In 2003, he set Green Bay's single-season rushing record with 1,883 yards. He had multiple huge games that year, including a 218-yard performance in the final game of the season against the Broncos. After a brief 2-year stint with the Texans, he returned to the Packers in 2009 to finish out his career. In over 8 years with them, Green ran for 8,322 yards on 1,851 carries with 54 touchdowns. One more thing to note is that he only holds the record over Jim Taylor by 115 yards. Now for our newest franchise, the Houston Texans, and they had a pretty good one in Arian Foster. In a lot of ways, he was the complete opposite of Jim Brown. This guy was a patient runner who looked like he was just floating around until suddenly a hole would open up and he was gone.
He has deceptive speed. I think that's what really catches people off guard because he is a big back, but when he makes that cut, he's gone.
It's easy to forget that he was undrafted out of Tennessee in 2009, but he worked his way up from the practice squad to a featured back role and became the face of Houston's run game. In the 2010 opener against the Colts, he ran for 231 yards and 3 touchdowns, which set the Texans' single-game rushing record. By the end of that season, Foster led the entire league with 1,616 rushing yards, so you had an undrafted guy turn into a superstar in 1 year. Unfortunately, injuries hit him pretty hard. Everything from hamstring issues to a major back injury that needed surgery in 2013, those problems followed him for the rest of his career. Foster retired in 2016, 4 games into the year with Miami. He just knew it was time to walk away. After football, he got into music under the name Bobby Pheno and started podcasting. He ran for 6,472 yards on 1,454 carries with 54 rushing touchdowns in Houston over 7 years. Edgerrin James was a smooth, explosive runner who could also catch like a receiver. He fit perfectly into an offense that wanted to attack from every angle. And the crazy thing is, we never truly got to see what he could have been. He was drafted 4th overall in 1999 and won the NFL rushing title as a rookie. The pressure was on him from day one and he delivered. He led the league yet again in 2000 as the centerpiece of Indy's offense, putting up 2,303 yards from scrimmage and 18 total touchdowns. Then in 2001, 6 games in, he tore his ACL. These days, guys recover really well from that type of injury, but at the time it was more common that it would end careers. This caused Edge to completely have to change his game around, and he became more of a power back, which still worked well, but man, it's kind of scary to think that he could have been even better. After leaving Indy in 2006, he joined the Cardinals and had a few solid years there before spending one final season with Seattle. He was the Colts' all-time rushing leader with 9,226 yards on 2,188 carries and scored 64 rushing touchdowns in 7 years. Next is a guy who doesn't nearly get enough credit for how much of a beast he was. Fred Taylor was a big back with serious speed. He had smooth acceleration, long strides, and he could run through contact or just outrun everybody.
Just over a minute to go. Spin move by Taylor, stays on his feet. Taylor breaks a tackle, breaks another. He's gone! Touchdown, Jacksonville!
He became one of the Jaguars' first real stars. For years, he was the main weapon of that franchise. When he hit a crease, safeties went into panic mode trying to cut him off, because he could turn one good block into a home run play. In 2000, he actually led the league in yards per game with 107.6, which put him on pace for over 1,700 rushing yards in a full season, but he missed the first few weeks because of an injury. Even though he was loved by many Jags fans, they ended up releasing him in 2009, which caused him to sign with the Patriots. Unfortunately, he was already 33 years old at the time and didn't get to contribute much other than being a veteran presence on the team. Over 11 years with Jacksonville, he ran for 11,271 yards on 2,428 carries with 62 rushing touchdowns. Jamal Charles was one of the fastest running backs that the league has ever seen. He could turn a normal play into a 60-yard touchdown with one cut. His stop-start ability and quickness made linebackers take terrible angles. They would just rip right through the opening. And you couldn't overcommit to stopping the run either because he was a great receiver. Just a constant mismatch in space.
Smith, fake the run, the throw to Jamal Charles, and Charles now a foot race. Goodbye, Jamal Charles!
He's another guy who struggled with injuries a lot, but during his prime, when he was healthy, he was one of the most dangerous weapons in NFL history. His best year was in 2013, where he led the league with 19 total touchdowns and had 1,980 yards from scrimmage. Towards the tail end of his career, Charles ended up with Denver and Jacksonville, but when you say his name, of course, everybody thinks about Kansas City. Charles ran for 7,260 yards on 1,332 carries with 43 rushing touchdowns over 9 years with the Chiefs. Marcus Allen was a clutch running back who could finish at the goal line and catch passes out of the backfield very well. At USC in 1981, he ran for 2,342 yards and won the Heisman, Maxwell, and Walter Camp Awards. He was the complete package coming out of college. And although his rookie year was shortened by the strike, he still ran for 697 yards, led the league with 11 rushing touchdowns, and won Offensive Rookie of the Year. But probably his best game came in Super Bowl 18, where he ran for 191 yards and 2 touchdowns, including a 74-yard score in the fourth quarter. That rushing total was a Super Bowl record at the time, and he took home Super Bowl MVP.
Crockett giving to Allen, sending him wide left. He has to reverse his field, but he gets away for a moment. Comes back up to the 30, 25, 40. Runs past 2 men at the 50. Touchdown Raiders!
In 1985, he carried the ball 380 times for 1,759 yards and won the NFL MVP, even finishing that season with 9 straight 100-yard games. Then things got kind of complicated after that. From 1987, he shared the backfield with Bo Jackson, and the relationship with the team broke down. When he left for Kansas City in 1993, he revived his career there, leading the NFL with 12 rushing touchdowns during that first year. In total, he ran for 8,545 yards on 2,090 carries with 79 touchdowns for the Raiders over 11 years. Then we're on to the Chargers, and this one should be obvious. LaDainian Tomlinson was the ultimate weapon when the franchise was still located in San Diego. An elite runner, dangerous receiver, and he even had his fair share of touchdown passes. He scored at an absolutely insane rate and was so good that it became normal for him to dominate week after week.
He's a great player, great athlete. He just absolutely made guys look silly, time after time after time.
At TCU, he ran for 406 yards and 6 touchdowns in a single game. He won the Doak Walker Award as a senior, and there was a ton of hype around him coming into the league. The Chargers drafted him 5th overall in 2001, and he immediately became a workhorse. He put up 8 straight seasons with at least 1,500 yards from scrimmage. And in 2006, at the peak of his prime, he put together one of the best seasons of any offensive player in history. Tomlinson set the single-season touchdown record with 31 and won NFL MVP. It didn't matter whether he was sprinting the length of the field, catching passes, or jumping over the goal line in a way that makes the tush-push look weak. The guy just did it all. The Chargers even retired his number 21 in 2015, and he made the Hall of Fame in 2017. Over 9 years with San Diego, LT ran for 12,490 yards on 2,880 carries with 138 touchdowns. Similar to Emmitt Smith, Tomlinson is another player who people often forgot finished his career with another team. He joined the Jets for the 2010 and 2011 seasons before eventually retiring. Standing in at 6'2" and 240 pounds, Steven Jackson was a huge runner who carried heavy workloads for years, even when the teams around him weren't that great. He really doesn't get the credit that he deserves. At Oregon State, he ran for 3,625 yards and had 4,305 scrimmage yards with 45 total touchdowns. The St. Louis Rams drafted him 24th overall in 2004, and he learned behind one of the best to ever do it, Marshall Faulk. Jackson took over the feature role in 2005, and the very next year, he ran for 1,528 yards along with catching 90 passes for 806 receiving yards. He led the NFL with 2,334 yards from scrimmage and had 16 total touchdowns. He also became only the 6th player to have 8 consecutive 1,000-yard rushing seasons from 2005 to 2012. And in over 9 years with St. Louis, Jackson ran for 10,138 yards on 2,396 carries with 56 touchdowns. The Dolphins are up next, and we're going to go all the way back to Larry Csonka for this one. Drafted 8th overall in the first round of 1968, he was a battering Ram fullback who really set the tone. In 1972, Miami went undefeated and set a then record 2,960 team rushing yards. Csonka and Mercury Morris both ran for 1,000, becoming the first duo in NFL history to do so. Csonka's career had some crazy turns after that. He jumped to the World Football League for 1 year in 1975, then came back to play for the Giants before eventually returning to Miami for one final season in 1979. By the time he'd called it quits, he'd ran for 6,737 yards on 1,506 carries with 53 touchdowns for Miami over 8 total years. Speaking of strong running backs, Adrian Peterson is up next. He ran with a mix of breakaway speed and the kind of insane power that you just don't see very often. He made long touchdowns feel like they were on the horizon at all times. In 2004, as a freshman at Oklahoma, he ran for 1,925 yards, becoming the first freshman ever to finish as a runner-up in Heisman voting. Then he exploded onto the scene in the pros. As a rookie in 2007, he set the single-game rushing record in week number 9 against the Chargers with 296 yards, and he even won Offensive Rookie of the Year. Every time he touched the ball, he was looking to wreck someone's day.
Favre on 3rd down, over the top, the pass is complete from 1st down. Adrian Peterson takes it all the way down.
Defenders who's played against him, they said it hurts when he runs, so you got to respect that and admire that.
Peterson unfortunately tore his ACL and MCL late in 2011, causing many people to wonder about his longevity in the league. Little did they know he would come back and run for 2,097 yards the very next year, only 8 yards short of tying Dickerson's all-time record. It's crazy to think how Edge had to completely change his game after his knee injury, but AD's injury somehow seemed to make him even better. He even won NFL MVP in that 2012 season, making him the most recent running back to win the award. Unfortunately, his legacy is kind of overshadowed by off-field issues. In 2014, he was indicted in Texas on a child injury charge and was suspended for the rest of the year. Also, after retirement, Peterson found himself in over $12 million of debt. With the Vikings, though, he ran for 11,747 yards on 2,418 carries with 97 touchdowns over 10 years. Alright, next up we're on to the Patriots with Sam Cunningham. He was a fullback who got the nickname Bam, and it was easy to see why. At 6'3" and 226 pounds, he was built for setting the tone. At USC, he was a first-team All-American and a captain on the 1972 national title team. The Patriots drafted him 11th overall in 1973, and he was solid in the pros as well. His best year was 1977, where he totaled 1,385 scrimmage yards and 5 touchdowns. Cunningham was also a key piece of the 1978 Patriots, who set an NFL record with 3,165 team rushing yards. That record stood until the 2019 Ravens. In total, Cunningham ran for 5,453 yards on 1,385 carries, with 43 touchdowns in New England over the span of 9 years. For the Saints, their all-time leader is Alvin Kamara, a running back that is slippery, keeps his balance through contact, and turns checkdown plays into huge gains. After things not working out at Alabama, he broke out at Hutchinson Community College with 1,253 rushing yards and 18 touchdowns in just 9 games. Those performances were good enough to land him at Tennessee before he declared for the 2017 draft. The Saints took him 67th overall, and he immediately outperformed his draft position. Kamara won Offensive Rookie of the Year and made the Pro Bowl with a pretty insane season. He had 1,554 yards from scrimmage and 13 touchdowns, also making second-team All-Pro. And from there on, he just flat-out dominated.
The balance is insane. I think it's always going to take more than one guy to bring him down. You see the little clips that he puts up in the offseason, him doing those little balancing drills with his trainers. It translates directly to the field.
When you think of moments that define him, you probably remember that Christmas Day game against Minnesota in 2020. He ran for 155 yards and 6 rushing touchdowns, which tied an NFL record for a single game. He hasn't made the Pro Bowl since 2021, but this past 2025 season was the only time in his whole career that he's been under 1,000 scrimmage yards. Kamara might be on his way out of the league soon, but so far he's ran for 7,250 yards on 1,674 carries with 61 rushing touchdowns for New Orleans over 9 years. Alright, let's move on to the Giants, and Tiki Barber is going to be their all-time leader. He's a guy who had a serious fumbling issue, but when he did hold onto the ball, he was one of the best offensive weapons in the league. He's one of only 3 running backs ever to have 10,000 rushing yards and 5,000 receiving yards. Barber's best year was in 2005 when he turned 30, which is pretty crazy to think about. He led the league with 2,390 yards from scrimmage and had the highest approximate value in the league, which meant he was essential for New York. But probably his best moment came in Week 17 of 2006 at Washington. The Giants desperately needed a win to make the playoffs, and he ran for 234 yards with 3 touchdowns to lock their spot up in the postseason. It's crazy to think that he retired after that 2006 season, and the Giants ended up winning the Super Bowl the very next year. But he was still at the top of his game. Those last 3 seasons, he was over 2,000 scrimmage yards every time. So he could have easily continued playing at a high level. He ended up retiring for multiple reasons, including the toll it was taking on his body, but there was also a constant clash between Barber and then head coach Tom Coughlin. In total, Barber ran for 10,449 yards on 2,217 carries, with 55 touchdowns for the Giants over 10 years. Let's hop over to the Jets now, and another legend from the 2000s, Curtis Martin. He was a no-drama workhorse who just showed up and produced every single week. He has this crazy life story where he lost his grandmother to murder and survived a near-death incident at age 15 when somebody tried to pull a trigger on him 7 times, but the weapon didn't fire. Martin didn't even play football until his senior year of high school, then he ran for 1,705 yards and 20 touchdowns in that one season. When the Patriots drafted him in the 3rd round of 1995, he told his family he didn't even want to play professional football. But with a little convincing, he immediately started to dominate with 1,748 scrimmage yards and 15 total touchdowns, winning Offensive Rookie of the Year. For the 1998 season, he left New England for the Jets because the Patriots didn't match their offer in free agency. Then he just ran crazy for the rest of his career. I mean, he won the rushing title with 1,697 yards at 31 years old and made the Hall of Fame in 2012. Martin ran for 10,302 yards on 2,560 carries with 58 touchdowns for the Jets over 8 years. Sean McCoy was lightning in a bottle. He could cut on a dime and make defenders look stupid.
Again, the handoff goes to McCoy. He got the 40, 45, midfield, 45-40, 35-30. McCoy at the 20, at the 15, at the 10, at the 5, and he is out of bounds.
But his career almost ended early when he broke his leg in high school. That threatened everything and even caused many colleges to revoke their scholarship offers. Even so, he managed to come back even stronger and still become a star at Pitt with back-to-back big seasons. In the NFL, he had 1,672 yards from scrimmage in just his second year, kicking off a run of 8 straight seasons with over 1,000 total yards. In 2011, he made his first All-Pro team and even led the league with 20 total touchdowns. But I think his best year was 2013 when he led the NFL in rushing with 1,607 yards and had a league-leading 2,146 yards from scrimmage, coming second in Offensive Player of the Year voting. In 2015, the Eagles traded him to Buffalo for linebacker Kiko Alonso, a trade that I despise as a Philly fan to this day, but in Buffalo, he immediately became the centerpiece of their offense. Late in his career, Shady won back-to-back Super Bowls with different teams, the Chiefs in 2019 and the Bucs in 2020, along with making the NFL 2010's All-Decade team. With the Eagles, he ran for 6,792 yards on 1,461 carries with 44 touchdowns over just 6 years. Franco Harris was a powerful back who had extreme toughness, but he also had great patience. Obviously, his most famous moment is the immaculate reception.
And his pass is broken up by Tatum. Tipped off. Franco Harris has it. And he's over.
That gave the Steelers their first ever playoff win. As a rookie in 1972, he ran for 1,055 yards at 5.6 yards per carry, winning NFL Offensive Rookie of the Year. Harris won 4 Super Bowl rings and also won Super Bowl IX MVP after running for 158 yards and a touchdown against the Vikings. In over 12 years, he ran for 11,950 yards on 2,881 carries with 91 touchdowns for Pittsburgh. Next up is Frank Gore, whose greatest trait was his longevity. Somehow he managed to play at a pretty high level for 16 years. In fact, he's third in NFL career rushing yards with 16,000 on the dot. He never led the league in rushing, never won any awards, and never made first-team All-Pro, but he's only behind Jerry Rice, Emmitt Smith, and Walter Payton in all-time scrimmage yards. Which is even more impressive when you factor in that, at Miami, he tore his ACL in his right knee in 2002. Then he tore the left one in 2003, but he came back and played well enough to get drafted in the 3rd round. His breakout season with the 49ers was in 2006 when he ran for 1,695 yards and set a franchise single-season record. He also became the first 49ers player to lead the NFC in rushing yards. Gore reached Super Bowl 47 with San Francisco in the 2012 season, but unfortunately they came up just short. And after he retired, he came back to the organization as the 49ers personnel advisor in 2023. He ran for 11,073 yards on 2,442 carries with 64 touchdowns for San Francisco over 10 years. Sticking with the NFC West, next up is the Seahawks and Shaun Alexander, who was just a touchdown machine. He ran behind that dominant Seahawks line that included Walter Jones and Steve Hutchinson.
Alexander, nice cut. Alexander in the middle of the field, and he's gone. Troy James trying to catch it. Touchdown.
In 2001, week number 9 against the Raiders, he ran for 266 yards and 3 touchdowns, helping the Seahawks to win 34-27. Remember, this was a completely different Raiders team than we know today. They were at the top of their division and went to the Super Bowl the very next year. In 2002, Alexander scored 5 total touchdowns in just 1 half against Minnesota, which is still an NFL record for a position player to this day. Then in 2004, he finished just 1 single yard short of Curtis Martin for the NFL rushing title. I guess it gave him a big chip on his shoulder though, because the 2005 season was ridiculous. He led the league in rushing, won NFL MVP and Offensive Player of the Year, all while carrying the Seahawks to the Super Bowl. That year, he also set the single season touchdown record at 28. Alexander ran for 1,880 yards with 27 rushing touchdowns, which is just insane. It's honestly kind of crazy that he hasn't made the Hall of Fame yet. In total, he ran for 9,429 yards on 2,176 carries with 100 touchdowns for Seattle over 9 years. Moving on to James Wilder for the Bucs, another guy who was ran into the ground during his peak. The 1984 season was easily his best. He had 407 carries plus 85 catches for 492 total touches, which led the league. That resulted in him having 2,229 yards from scrimmage. He was so close to the record during that last game of the season that in the final minute, Coach John McKay ordered Tampa's defense to let New York score so Wilder could get the ball back and chase the record, but they caught on and didn't let it happen. I'll tell you what, the workload stayed crazy in 1985 too. He had 418 touches, 1,641 scrimmage yards, and 10 total touchdowns. Even Lawrence Taylor said Wilder was one of the toughest running backs he'd ever faced. In total, he ran for 5,957 yards on 1,575 carries, with 37 touchdowns in Tampa Bay over 9 years. Not many NFL players have a chant that you hear in every single game they play. Well, Eddie George did. He was a powerful back who wore defenses down as time went on.
He was a bulldozer. He was truly 3 yards in a cloud of dust. But came third and fourth quarter, that's when you start to see Eddie exert his will over the opposing tacklers.
At Ohio State, he had some early fumbling problems, but once he fixed that, it was game over. As a senior, he had 2,225 scrimmage yards and scored 24 touchdowns en route to winning the Heisman Trophy. The Oilers drafted him 14th overall in 1996, and he was dominant right away. He started immediately and won Rookie of the Year. One of the most impressive things about him is that even though he was a power back, he never missed a game during his Tennessee days. In fact, he managed to reach 10,000 rushing yards before he ever missed a game, which is insanely impressive. George helped Tennessee to Super Bowl 34, having 521 yards from scrimmage in that postseason with 2 touchdowns in the Super Bowl itself. Eventually, the cost of that workload caught up to him though. By the time he went to Dallas in 2004, he only had 515 yards from scrimmage. The first time in his career he dropped below 1,000. Throughout 8 years with the Titans, George ran for 10,009 yards on 2,733 carries with 64 touchdowns. But you really don't get much more powerful than John Riggins, the all-time leading rusher for Washington. Somehow, he would get even stronger in the playoffs. In the 1982 postseason, he had 625 yards from scrimmage in 4 playoff games, which is an NFL postseason record. The guy was just an absolute workhorse. In Super Bowl 17, on 4th and 1, Riggins broke a tackle from Don McNeil and ripped off a 43-yard touchdown that swung the game. And he finished that game with 166 rushing yards and won Super Bowl MVP. He was like an early version of Derrick Henry, and he was really good even into his 30s. At age 34, he ran for 24 touchdowns, also an NFL record at the time. Then finally, he led the league in rushing touchdowns again in 1984 at the age of 35. In total, Riggins ran for 7,472 yards on 1,988 carries, with 79 touchdowns for Washington over 9 years. Alright guys, that's every team's all-time rushing leader. Some of these guys are absolute legends who every modern back looks up to, and others could have been Hall of Famers but were stuck in terrible situations. Today we're going through all 32 NFL teams to find their greatest receiver ever, or at least all-time yardage leader. And some of these guys are certainly going to surprise you. And what better place to start than Larry Fitzgerald? He spent all 17 years of his career with Arizona, which is very rare for a player of his caliber. Most stars eventually chase a ring or a bigger contract later in their careers, not Fitzgerald. And let me tell you, he was the complete package. The guy barely ever dropped a pass. In fact, he had more tackles than drops over 17 seasons. It's one of those crazy stats that's really hard to wrap your head around. Fitz was an 11-time Pro Bowler and completely changed the position to the point where you could never be certain if he was covered or not. He would just catch everything and make big play after big play.
It's just unreal to see a guy that has been doing it at a high level for that long.
In the 2008 Cardinals playoff run, he was absolutely on fire. 546 yards and 7 touchdowns across 4 games, including the 64-yard touchdown catch to put Arizona up in the Super Bowl and almost secure them a ring. Of course, the Cardinals lost in the final seconds, but that catch still gets replayed all the time. When Fitz finally hung it up, he had 17,492 receiving yards and 121 touchdowns. And to top it all off, he just made the Hall of Fame in 2026. If you watched Julio Jones in his prime, you already know he was a different breed of receiver. Big, fast, and consistently coming down with catches that had no business being completions.
Yeah, I love Julio. It's very rare to see somebody who's built like that, you know, who can play like a smaller receiver.
His 2015 season was one of the best I have ever seen. His 1,871 yards from scrimmage ranks 4th all-time for a receiver in a single year. And Julio wasn't done, because in 2016 against the Panthers, he put up 300 receiving yards in a single game. Actually, he had multiple 250-yard games in his career. It's extremely rare for a receiver to hit those numbers once, let alone 3 different times. Jones had a streak of 6 Pro Bowl years in a row from 2014 through 2019, but unfortunately, injuries cut his prime short. Still, those peak years were some of the most fun plays you will ever watch. When it was all said and done, he had 12,896 yards and 60 touchdowns for Atlanta. Then there's Mark Andrews, who holds the Ravens record despite being a tight end. He was a 4-star prospect out of high school and just kept grinding until he became one of the most important weapons in Baltimore's offense. What makes his story a little bit different is that he's had type 1 diabetes since he was 9 years old, but that doesn't stop him from going out there and playing this high-energy, physical style of football right in the middle of the field. In 2021, he set Ravens single-season records with 107 catches and 1,361 yards. That's elite production for any position, let alone a tight end. Actually, Andrews just recently became the franchise's all-time leading receiver in 2025 in the Ravens' 23-16 win over the Browns. As of right now, he's put up 5,952 yards and 56 touchdowns for Baltimore. There should be plenty of gas left in the tank. That brings us to Andre Reed, one of the key players of those Bills teams in the early 90s. He never led the league in receiving yards, but he did have a very impressive year in 1994, finishing with 13.9 yards per touch, which was the most out of anyone in the NFL. One of his biggest games was in their playoff comeback against the Oilers during the 1992 season. The Bills were down 35-3 in the third quarter. Reed caught 3 touchdowns in the second half as Buffalo completed the largest comeback in NFL history at the time. Reed waited a long time for his Hall of Fame call because there is such a crazy jam at wide receiver with so many great players waiting to get in, but he did eventually get there in 2014. Reed finished with 13,095 yards and 86 touchdowns for the Bills. Steve Smith was mentally one of the toughest guys on the football field. He came into the league undersized at just 5'9", and instead of quietly proving people wrong, he made sure to be very loud about it. The trash talk, the fire, the intensity, that's just who he was, and fans ate it up. One of Smith's biggest moments as a Panther came in the 2003 playoff game against the Rams. In double overtime with the game on the line, he caught a 69-yard touchdown to send Carolina through to the next round.
DeLone fires to an open Smith. Steve Smith is going to go all the way. No flags down. Smith scores, and the Carolina Panthers win in overtime.
He was a big reason the Panthers made it all the way to the Super Bowl that year before eventually losing to New England. In 2005, he had one of the best seasons ever for a receiver. He won the receiving triple crown with the most catches, most yards, and most touchdowns in the entire NFL. 103 catches, 1,563 yards, and 12 touchdowns. The most impressive thing about it was that his quarterback was Jake Delhomme. Not saying Delhomme was a horrible quarterback or anything, but he wasn't at that elite tier. Smith finished with 12,197 yards and 67 touchdowns for the Panthers. Johnny Morris was a 12th round draft pick who became the Bears' all-time leading receiver, and he did it in an era where teams rarely threw the ball. This guy tied the world record in the 50-yard dash when he was a part of his school's track team, so you knew he was lightning in a bottle. And he was actually drafted to be a running back and a kick returner, but later was moved to receiver in 1961 once they realized how deadly he could be. Morris helped the Bears win the 1963 NFL Championship, and in 1964, he led the entire NFL with 93 catches for 1,200 yards and 10 touchdowns. Those numbers would hold up in any era, but back then, they were extraordinary. After he retired, Morris spent decades as a Bears broadcaster, so multiple generations of Chicago fans grew up with his voice in their ears. He finished with 5,059 yards and 31 touchdowns for the Bears. Chad Johnson made watching the Bengals genuinely fun, which wasn't always an easy thing to do.
I got a trivia question. It's a new year, same old question. How do you stop 85?
The celebrations were a whole spectacle on their own. The dancing, the props, the signs, you name it. Then in 2006, he tried changing the back of his jersey to say Ocho Cinco on his nameplate. When the NFL fined him for doing so, naturally Johnson had to prove a point, so he went out and legally changed his last name to Ochocinco just because his jersey number was 85 and to spite the NFL. But unlike his name that he would change back a few years later, the football was always real. He had 5 straight Pro Bowl appearances from 2003 to 2007. He led the NFL in receiving yards in 2006 with 1,369. And during that same year, he put up 260 yards and 2 touchdowns against the Chargers, then followed that up with 190 yards and 3 touchdowns against the Saints. That's 450 total yards in 2 consecutive games, which was an NFL record at the time. Even on bad Bengals teams, he showed up to play every single week. Gave the fans a show in the process. Johnson finished with 10,783 yards and 66 touchdowns for Cincinnati. Ozzie Newsome wasn't flashy, he was just fundamentally great. They called him the Wizard of Oz, and the name fit. He was a tight end who ran great routes and caught passes like a receiver, and he did it so consistently that at the time of his retirement, he was the NFL's all-time leader at the position in both catches and yardage. His 1984 season had to be his best, with 89 catches, 1,001 yards, and a single-game franchise record of 191 receiving yards. To make things even better, he earned first-team All-Pro honors that year. Then after playing, he went on to build 2 Super Bowl teams as the Ravens general manager. Not too many guys can say they were elite at both. He finished with 7,980 yards and 47 touchdowns for Cleveland, while also being inducted into the Hall of Fame in 1999. We've got another tight end next with Jason Witten and the Cowboys, and talk about being reliable. He played 17 years, 16 of them with the Cowboys, and he just showed up every single week. No drama, no complaints, he blocked, he caught, and he would grind out yards when the team needed it most.
Getting the pressure harder with his ability, gets away, and the pass caught by Jason Witten all alone for the touchdown.
His 2007 season was his best overall. He had 1,145 yards from scrimmage and made first-team All-Pro. But honestly, the more impressive thing is just how long he sustained that level. Over his time in Dallas, he made 11 Pro Bowls. In terms of individual moments though, I have to talk about his game against the Giants in 2012, where he caught 18 passes in a single game. That's an NFL record for tight ends, which no one has beaten since.
Jason Witten's probably a guy that can play in both eras. He's athletic for this era, but he's big and strong for another area.
He finished with 12,977 yards and 72 touchdowns before wrapping up his career with the Raiders in 2020. Rod Smith went undrafted out of a small school in Missouri, so he started his career with almost nobody believing in him. Despite that, he ended up becoming the Broncos' all-time leading receiver with 2 Super Bowl rings. He was also the first undrafted player in NFL history to reach 10,000 receiving yards. His Super Bowl 33 performance said everything about his heart. 5 catches, 152 yards, including an 80-yard touchdown catch that gave the Broncos a 2-score lead in the second quarter. Smith never really chased attention or made noise off the field. He would just show up alongside John Elway and shine when his name was called. He finished with 11,389 yards and 68 touchdowns for Denver. To absolutely nobody's surprise, Calvin Johnson is the all-time leader for the Lions, and he's arguably the most physically gifted receiver to ever play the game. Megatron might just be the most fitting nickname of all time. At 6'5" with elite speed, he really did remind you of a transformer. The crazy part is he was doing all of this on Lions teams that gave opposing defenses basically nothing else to worry about. No real running game to fear, no other receiver to respect, it was just Calvin, and everyone knew it. In 2012, he set the NFL single-season receiving record with 1,964 yards. That year, he had 11 games over 100 yards and 2 over 200. Teams were throwing double coverage at him pretty much every single snap, but it still didn't matter. Then in 2013 against the Cowboys, he caught 14 passes for 329 yards in one game. That's the second most receiving yards in a single game in NFL history. He was even hauling in huge plays in triple coverage.
He just throws it up. Randy Moss is the only other guy that I can think of that you would even attempt something like that.
He retired in 2016 at the age of 30, even though he was still playing at an elite level, and Lions fans were gutted.
When it's time to take out the next day, walked to the office, sat down, I'm like, Coach, I'm done, I'm retired. I can't do it anymore. I broke down crying, and he was just like, you sure? I can't do it.
But what he gave that franchise was genuinely something special. Carrying a struggling team almost entirely on his back and putting up numbers that nobody has come close to matching since. He finished with 11,619 yards and 83 touchdowns for Detroit. Donald Driver was a 7th round draft pick who became the Packers' all-time leading receiver. Another late round guy who just refused to quit and wouldn't take no for an answer. The thing that stood out with Driver was that he played fearlessly over the middle, always with a big smile. He caught passes from both Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers across a career that spanned 14 years. Not too many receivers can say they were the go-to guy for 2 different Hall of Fame quarterbacks. From 2004 to 2009, he had 6 straight 1,000-yard seasons, but one of his biggest moments came in the NFC Championship game against the Giants in the 2007 season, where he hauled in a 90-yard touchdown. Even though they lost that game in OT, he still got a Super Bowl ring in the 2010 season, which was a great way to reward everything he gave the franchise over those years. Driver finished with 10,137 yards and 61 touchdowns for Green Bay. Not too many receivers can strike fear in a defense like Andre Johnson could. He was the Houston Texans' first real superstar, and he earned that status the hard way. The Texans were a brand new franchise when he arrived, and his rookie year was just their 2nd season ever. He was the only guy that cornerbacks were worried about when they played Houston. Even so, he led the NFL in receiving yards in both 2008 and 2009. His style was very physical. He didn't try to trick you with fancy routes. He would just run at corners and go up to get the ball. It was almost like smaller defensive backs genuinely didn't want to cover him because he would just bully them after the catch. When you think of Andre, one of the games that comes to mind is in 2012 against Jacksonville in Week 11. He had 14 catches, 273 yards, and then the game-winning touchdown in overtime. That performance alone would have cemented his place in Texans history. The fact that he did it consistently for over a decade makes it even more impressive. And of course, I can't finish off this section without bringing up his iconic fight with Cortland Finnegan. Johnson finished with 13,597 yards and 64 touchdowns for Houston. Around the same time that Johnson entered the league, Marvin Harrison Sr. was quietly putting up one of the greatest careers in NFL history. He barely spoke a word. He just went out there and made you look stupid. His partnership with Peyton Manning is one of the best quarterback-receiver duos the game has ever seen, and what really made it work was how precise Harrison was. His routes were nearly perfect every time. Manning always knew where he would be, and Harrison almost never let him down. In 2002, he caught 143 passes in a single year. That was an NFL record at the time, and he did it without dancing, without trash talking, without any of that. He just ran his routes, caught the ball, and did it all over again, year after year. Harrison led the league in receiving yards twice, receptions twice, and touchdowns once. During his prime, for 8 straight years, he had over 1,100 yards and 10-plus touchdowns. He helped the Colts win a Super Bowl in the 2006 season and never once made it about himself. Football fans who really appreciate pure skill still talk about him as one of the most complete receivers ever. Harrison finished with 14,580 yards and 128 touchdowns for Indy. Then we're on to Jimmy Smith, who could be the most overlooked receiver on this entire list. He was actually drafted by Dallas and only had 1 target before missing the 1993 and 1994 seasons completely. In 1995, he joined the Jags and spent his best years with them in the late 90s and early 2000s, quietly putting up massive numbers while the team punched way above its weight class. In 1999, Smith led the entire NFL with 116 catches for 1,636 yards. His most insane individual game came against the Ravens in 2000. He had 15 catches, 291 yards, and 3 touchdowns. The Jags lost 39-36, but that performance is still one of the best single-game efforts you'll find anywhere in NFL history. After 11 years with Jacksonville, Smith finished with 12,287 yards and 67 touchdowns. Travis Kelce is the complete opposite of guys like Marvin Harrison Sr. and Jimmy Smith. This guy is a huge character and has to be the best tight end since 2015. Kelce had 7 straight years with over 1,000 receiving yards, which is a record for tight ends. He runs routes like a receiver, catches everything, and then somehow makes people miss after the catch as well, with the kind of quickness that can catch defenders off guard. But what really separates Kelce is how he performs when the games matter most. In a 2019 playoff game against the Texans, he caught 3 touchdowns in a single quarter to help bring the Chiefs back from down 24-0 to win the game 51-31. In the 2022 divisional round, he set the all-time postseason record for receptions by a tight end in a single game with 14 catches, and now he's overtaken Jerry Rice for the most career playoff receptions ever. His chemistry with Patrick Mahomes helped turn the Chiefs into a dynasty, which includes 3 Super Bowl rings. So far, he's got 13,002 yards and 82 touchdowns for Kansas City. Also, it looks like he's going to be back for at least the 2026 season, so those numbers should keep on climbing. Tim Brown played for 17 seasons, 16 of them with the Raiders, and he was still producing deep into his 30s. His best season came in 1997 when he led the NFL with 104 catches for 1,408 yards. He was the guy who bridged the old Raiders teams to the new ones, and the whole league respected him for that. At 35 years old, he returned a punt 88 yards for a touchdown, the oldest player ever to score that way. Then at 36, he caught 13 passes for 144 yards in a single game. Most receivers are done by then, but Brown, he just kept going. He finished with 14,734 yards and 99 touchdowns for the Raiders. Antonio Gates never played a single snap of college football. Instead, he played basketball at Kent State. That didn't stop him from becoming one of the greatest tight ends the NFL has ever seen. That includes 116 career touchdown receptions, which is the all-time record for the position, and I have a feeling it's going to stand for a long time. His 2004 season was something special. He set the NFL's single-season record for tight end touchdowns with 13, even though he was only in his second year. His chemistry with Phillip Rivers turned them into one of the best quarterback tight end duos of that era, and Gates kept going until he was 38. He finished with 11,841 yards and 116 touchdowns for the Chargers and was recently inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2025. Isaac Bruce is probably best remembered for one play, but his career deserves way more credit than that. He was one of the most consistent receivers in NFL history. In 1995, he would have set the single-season receiving record with 1,781 yards, but unfortunately, Jerry Rice set it with 1,848 that same year. Bruce was one of the key guys in the greatest show on turf offense that made the Rams the most exciting team in football, and he showed up big when it mattered most. In Super Bowl 34, the Rams were tied with the Titans late in the fourth quarter. Then, Bruce caught a 73-yard touchdown to put them ahead. It's still one of the most iconic plays in Super Bowl history. In total, Bruce had 8 1,000-yard seasons and made 4 Pro Bowls. He finished with 14,109 yards and 84 touchdowns for the Rams. Mark Duper and Mark Clayton lined up together for the Miami Dolphins in the 1980s, and they were known as the Marks Brothers. Dan Marino threw bombs to both of them, and it was genuinely one of the most exciting offenses to watch in that era. Duper was the deep threat. He had the speed to get behind defenses, and Marino had the arm to find him. In 1986, he had 1,313 receiving yards and 11 touchdowns, which was probably his best season. He put up 4 1,000-yard seasons total, with his last coming at age 32. He finished with 8,869 yards and 59 touchdowns for Miami. Chris Carter was drafted by the Eagles in 1987, but he got cut before he reached his full potential. The reason was that he was dealing with severe substance abuse problems and had a fallout with head coach Buddy Ryan. Then the Vikings picked him up, and he turned into one of the most elite receivers the game has ever seen. His hands were just ridiculous. People still say he might have the best hands ever. He made one-handed catches look routine and caught contested balls in traffic that nobody else would come down with. In 1994, he set the NFL single-season record with 122 catches. Then in 1995, he came back again and caught 122 more, this time with a league-leading 17 touchdowns. Carter was the go-to guy in the red zone, the clutch third down receiver, and the guy the Vikings went to when they needed a big play. He did it year after year. He was only the second player in NFL history to reach 1,000 career receptions, joining Jerry Rice at the time. Carter finished with 12,383 yards and 110 touchdowns for Minnesota. Stanley Morgan doesn't get talked about much anymore, but Patriots fans from the 80s remember him very well. They called him Stanley Steamer because of his speed. He was the deep threat on those Patriots teams and consistently gave defenses a problem, like in 1979 when he led the NFL with 12 receiving touchdowns, or against the Dolphins in 1981 when he caught 5 passes for 182 yards and a touchdown, which was a franchise record at the time. Morgan's best year had to be in 1986 though, when he caught 84 passes for 1,491 yards and 10 touchdowns. He finished with 10,352 yards and 67 touchdowns for New England. People referred to Marquise Colston as the Quiet Storm, and that nickname sums him up very well. You see, he was disrespected from the very beginning, getting drafted in the 7th round at 252nd overall. But he's another guy who just showed up every week, made plays, and let the results do the talking. He had 6 1,000-yard seasons and became the Saints' all-time leader in catches, yardage, and touchdowns. When the Super Bowl came around in the 2009 season, he caught 7 passes to help New Orleans win their first ever title. That Saints offense was full of weapons led by Drew Brees, and Colston held it all together. He finished with 9,759 yards and 72 touchdowns for New Orleans. The Giants had some very exciting receivers over the years, but none of which have managed to beat Amani Toomer. He had 5 straight 1,000-yard seasons in his prime and kind of doesn't get the recognition he deserves. He was also a key piece in the Giants' 2007 playoff run. In the wild card round against the Bucs, he hauled in 7 passes for 74 yards and a touchdown. Then he caught 2 touchdowns against Dallas in the divisional round, and in Super Bowl 42, he led all Giants receivers with 6 catches for 84 yards as New York pulled off one of the biggest upsets in Super Bowl history against the undefeated Patriots. Toomer finished with 9,497 yards and 54 touchdowns for the Giants. Don Maynard was the deep threat who helped put the Jets on the map. He lined up alongside Joe Namath in the old AFL days, and the two of them were a real problem for defenses. Maynard averaged nearly 19 yards every time he caught the ball, which is very impressive to sustain over a whole career. For context, Randy Moss averaged 15.6 yards per catch. One of Maynard's biggest moments came in the 1968 championship game against the Raiders. He had 6 catches, 118 yards, and 2 touchdowns, including the game winner to send New York to Super Bowl III. When he retired, he held the all-time record for total receptions and receiving yards in pro football history. He also had 50 games with 100 or more receiving yards, which was a record at the time and still ranks inside the top 10 today. For a guy playing in a league that many people were still figuring out, those numbers were genuinely ahead of their time. Maynard finished with 11,732 yards and 88 touchdowns for the Jets and was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 1987. Harold Carmichael stood at 6'8", which in the 1970s was an unfair advantage at wide receiver. He used every inch of that height to expose defenders. In the red zone especially, he was almost impossible to cover. But the stat that really stands out is his consecutive games with a catch, 127 straight. That record stood for years and just shows how durable and reliable he was week after week.
To see this guy going across the middle, running from one sideline to the other, and then reach back and catch a ball with one hand away from where he's running, it was just amazing. He'd beat the throw, and the throw was errant, and he'd just reach back, catch it with one hand.
His best season came in 1973 when he led the league with 1,116 yards and 9 touchdowns. Then in 1979, he scored 11 touchdowns and helped the Eagles reach the Super Bowl the following year. Fans in Philly loved him because he would show up every single week and just do his job to the best of his ability. Carmichael eventually got his Hall of Fame call in 2020, which was a long time coming. He finished with 8,978 yards and 79 touchdowns for Philadelphia. Next up is another really tough player. Hines Ward played 14 years with the Steelers and embodied everything Pittsburgh football stands for.
He would go over the middle, catch the ball, take a hit, and never drop it.
He was one of the best blocking receivers the game has ever seen. Defenders genuinely didn't want to be on the wrong side of one of his blocks. But of course, he wouldn't be on this list if he couldn't catch the ball as well. He had 1,000 career receptions and 86 total touchdowns. His best season was in 2002 when he had 1,471 yards from scrimmage and 12 touchdowns, making second-team All-Pro. But maybe his biggest moment came in Super Bowl 40 against the Seahawks. Ward had 5 catches for 123 yards and a touchdown, winning the Super Bowl MVP. For a guy who did so much of the unglamorous work, it was the perfect recognition. In total, he had 2 Super Bowl rings, and he more than deserved both of them. He finished with 12,083 yards and 85 touchdowns for Pittsburgh. Jerry Rice is the greatest receiver to ever play the game. The guy has every major receiving record in NFL history, and his longevity at the position is going to be extremely hard to match for future players since he played for 20 years. But what made Rice different was the work ethic. He ran hill sprints in the offseason while other receivers were resting. He was obsessive about preparation in a way that very few athletes at any level ever are. He led the league in receiving yards 6 times, but his 1987 season was arguably the most dominant receiving performance ever recorded. He scored 23 total touchdowns in a strike-shortened season that only had 12 games. In Super Bowl 23, he made crucial catches on the game-winning drive late in the fourth quarter and finished with 215 yards and a touchdown. The next year in Super Bowl 24, he had 148 yards and 3 touchdowns. Year after year, when the moment was biggest, Rice would deliver. One of his craziest years was in 1995 at age 33. He still put up 1,848 yards and 16 total touchdowns. Every generation has a receiver that gets compared to him, but nobody has matched him yet, and his career records are the kind that feel impossible to beat. He played 3.5 years with the Raiders and half a season with Seattle to end his career, but in total with the 49ers, he finished with 19,247 yards and 176 touchdowns. Next up is Steve Largent, who was one of Rice's biggest inspirations. He wasn't the biggest guy and he wasn't the fastest either, he just refused to let anyone get the better of him. Largent came to Seattle when the franchise was still brand new, and he basically built the identity of that team on his back. Tough, reliable, and always open when the offense needed him most. When he retired, he held the NFL records for career receptions, receiving yards, and touchdown catches. Largent was a 7-time Pro Bowler, but his best year might have been in 1979, when he had a league-leading 1,237 receiving yards and 9 touchdowns. He finished with 13,089 yards and 100 touchdowns for Seattle and was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 1995. Mike Evans is a current player, but he's established himself as just as much of a legend as some of these other guys. He had 1,000 receiving yards in every season of his career up until 2025 when he got hurt. That's a streak of 11 straight seasons. As a rookie in 2014, he had a 209-yard, 2-touchdown game in Week 11 that made people sit up and take notice pretty quickly. But he had an even better game in 2022 against the Panthers. 10 catches, 207 yards, and 3 touchdowns in a division-clinching win. He was there through the tough years and then helped the Bucs win a Super Bowl when Brady arrived. Now that he's on the 49ers, I doubt he's ever going to return to Tampa, but while he was there, he racked up 13,052 yards and 108 touchdowns over 12 years. The Titans' all-time receiving leader is Ernest Givens, who played with the Houston Oilers run-and-shoot offense in the late 80s and early 90s. That attack was genuinely one of the most fun things happening in football at the time. He was the speed guy, quick enough to get behind defenses, and the Oilers had the perfect quarterback in Warren Moon to find him. In 1990, Givens made his first Pro Bowl with 1,044 yards from scrimmage and 9 touchdowns. He made the Pro Bowl again in 1992 after putting up 10 touchdowns. He finished with 7,935 yards and 46 touchdowns for the franchise. And then there's Art Monk for Washington. He's one of those guys who just quietly did everything right. You could rely on him to move the chains and keep the offense on the field. Not super flashy, but very effective.
Looking for Monk on the out pattern. He's got it at the 27.
He was part of 3 different Super Bowl winning teams, which tells you everything about how valuable he was. In 1984, he led the league with 106 catches, becoming the first player in NFL history to ever break 100, and he also had his first 1,000-yard season. But even in 1991, at age 34, he was still playing at a high level, putting up 1,068 yards from scrimmage and 8 touchdowns. In Super Bowl 26 that year, he caught 7 passes for 113 yards as Washington beat the Bills. He finished with 12,026 yards and 65 touchdowns for Washington, along with eventually making the Hall of Fame in 2008. Today, we're going to take a look at every NFL team's worst season ever. The Arizona Cardinals have experienced their fair share of misery, but to find their worst season ever, we need to go all the way back to 1943, when the team was still in Chicago and the league was decimated by World War II. The 1943 Chicago Cardinals lost all 10 games that they played, finishing dead last in the NFL West Division. The Cardinals' offense was virtually non-existent. Quarterback Ronnie Cahill threw for 608 yards and 3 touchdowns, but also 21 interceptions. They also lost the last game of the season 35-24 to the Chicago Bears, who would later go on to win the championship that year. The suffering continued into 1944 when player shortages forced the Cardinals to merge with the Pittsburgh Steelers to form Card Pit, adding another painful chapter to the franchise's struggles. They went 0-10 that season also, but I decided that we're going to go with the Cardinals' 1943 season for this video because it was solely their team and they weren't merged with anybody else. Okay, 1943 was extraordinary circumstances, but the 1967 Atlanta Falcons faced a different type of challenge. They were just a bad football team trying to find their footing, and it was only their second NFL season as a franchise.
In 2 years as head coach of the Falcons, Norb Hecker has learned the hard way that the margin between victory and defeat is indeed very small. This was nowhere more evident than in the Falcons' 67 season.
After managing 3 wins in their first year, the Falcons managed to get even worse, stumbling to a 1-12-1 record that landed them at the very bottom of the NFL standings. The team was shifted from the East Division to the Coastal Division with the addition of the New Orleans Saints to the league, placing Atlanta in a division where every other team finished 500 or better. Coached by Norb Hecker, the Falcons started by dropping their first 4 games, including a competitive 38-31 loss to the Baltimore Colts in the opener. They finally managed a tie against Washington in week number 5, followed by their lone victory, a nail-biter 21-20 win over the Minnesota Vikings in week number 7. They were a goal line fumble away from beating the Redskins.
There was the freak turn of events that cost Atlanta a victory against the Washington Redskins.
They couldn't catch a pass to save their lives.
There were the fingertip receptions that were almost, but not quite. Sure catches that should have been, but were not.
And they shot themselves in the foot with penalties.
There were the penalties that turned touchdowns into nightmares.
Pretty much the only good thing about this team was linebacker Tommy Nobis, later known as Mr. Falcon, who made the Pro Bowl and the All-Pro First Team. When the team started the 1968 season by losing their first 3 games, Hecker was fired, ending a forgettable chapter in Falcons history. Next up, the 1996 Baltimore Ravens hold a very unique place in our countdown. They were technically a new franchise that wasn't really new at all, and they actually had the best worst record on this list today.
A record crowd expected in Baltimore as the NFL returns to this city for the first time since 1983.
After Art Modell moved the Cleveland Browns to Baltimore in, let's just say, controversial circumstances, Cleveland kept the Browns' history and records. Baltimore became an expansion team without expansion benefits, retaining much of the 1995 Browns roster.
No logo, no colors. We don't have nothing but white helmets. and they're like, yeah, we the Ravens.
Despite finishing 4-12, the Ravens at least showed some promise on offense, ranking 6th in scoring with 371 points on the year. Quarterback Vinny Testaverde made the Pro Bowl with 4,177 yards and 33 touchdowns, while receivers Michael Jackson and Derek Alexander both topped 1,000 yards. The defense was abysmal though, which is kind of ironic considering what the team became. They gave up 441 points that year. The good news is, before the start of the 1996 season, they drafted Ray Lewis and Jonathan Ogden, who would later help transform the Ravens into Super Bowl champions within 4 years. While the Ravens showed some promise even in their worst year, some teams are just dreadful in every phase of the game, like the 71 Bills, for example.
In Buffalo, the Bills and the Cowboys forgot to bring their defense. Last Sunday saw Dallas allow more points than they gave up during the last 5 games of 1970. Incredibly, they still won.
Kind of feels like their season was doomed from the start when head coach John Rauch abruptly resigned after a dispute with owner Ralph Wilson. The Bills lost their first 10 games, ranking dead last in both points scored with 184 and points allowed with 394, for a pretty ugly negative 210 point differential. Their starting quarterback Dennis Shaw led the NFL in interceptions thrown with 26 while managing just 11 touchdowns. Even future Hall of Famer O.J. Simpson couldn't salvage the offense this year, rushing for 742 yards. Their only win came in week number 11 against the Patriots. Otherwise, the Bills suffered throughout 4 shutout losses, including humiliating blowouts of 43-0 to the Colts, 34-0 to the Dolphins. After going 8-8 in 1999 and 7-9 in 2000 under two-time Super Bowl winning coach George Seifert, the Panthers started out 2001 with a victory over the Vikings in their opener. Things were looking promising here, but what followed was something the NFL had never seen up to that point in time. 15 straight losses to close out the season. The Panthers struggled on both sides of the ball, ranking near the bottom in both scoring and on defense. What made this season particularly frustrating was how close they came to a few more wins, with 3 of their losses by just 1 or 2 points. One game in particular that wasn't close was the season finale against the New England Patriots, where they lost 38-6. Back then, the Patriots were led by a very young Tom Brady, who would go on to guide them to an improbable Super Bowl win over the heavily favored St. Louis Rams.
Coming from when the team was 0-2 and you take over, did you dream it would come to this?
Well, I really think you prepare for, that when your number is called to be ready to play. And, each week it's about getting better and learning. And being a young quarterback, you realize you're going to learn every week. And some days are better than others as I'm continuing to learn.
2001 was the year where the Panthers drafted 2 future stars in Steve Smith and Chris Jenkins, so at least they started laying groundwork for their Super Bowl run just 2 seasons later. The 1969 Chicago Bears delivered the worst season in the history of one of the NFL's cornerstone franchises. By that point, it was almost their 50th season in the league, and they fell to a shocking 1-13 record. What makes this Bears team particularly tragic is that they had 2 of the greatest players in franchise history, linebacker Dick Butkus and running back Gale Sayers. Despite coming back from 2 torn ligaments and ruptured cartilage in his knee in 1968, Sayers somehow still managed to lead the league in rushing with 1,032 yards, although by then his trademark explosiveness was a thing of the past. Butkus was a force of nature that season, earning first-team All-Pro honors while having 2 interceptions, 2 sacks, 2 fumble recoveries, and a safety. His performance even earned an MVP vote despite the team's horrible record. Now, the Bears had at least the greatness of Butkus and Sayers to soften the blow a bit. The 2002 Bengals, not so much. In 2002, they put together a 2-14 disaster season, the worst season in team history, to be exact, which is definitely saying something. Now, I know what you're thinking. Didn't the Bengals also go 2-14 in 2019? Well, they did, and while that team was awful too, the 2002 version was worse. In 2019, they at least had Andy Dalton under center instead of John Kitna, and the 2019 defense was a bit better, unlike the 2002 unit, which allowed the most points in the league. In 2002, Cincinnati stumbled right out of the gate, losing their first 7 games. To make things even worse, they failed to score more than 7 points in any of their first 4 matchups. Despite having legitimate talent in running back Corey Dillon, who had 1,311 yards and 7 touchdowns, and rookie receiver Chad Johnson, who had 1,166 yards and 5 touchdowns through the air, the Bengals still ranked 28th in scoring with just 279 points, and their defense gave up a league-worst 456 points. There was a time that the Bengals were feared when the jungle meant something.
The jungle represented team founder Paul Brown, 2 AFC championships, and a city of football diehards.
But all that felt like ancient history in 2002. As bad as the 2002 Bengals were, at least they managed to win a couple games. The 2017 Cleveland Browns couldn't even accomplish that, joining the 2008 Detroit Lions as the only teams in NFL history to complete a 16-game season without a single victory. After going 1-15 the year prior, Cleveland became the first franchise in NFL history with consecutive seasons of 15 or more losses, with a combined 1-31 record over that span. The very first touchdown they gave up summed up the entire year.
Blocked into the end zone. Free ball and picked up for the touchdown by Pittsburgh.
The crazy part is the Browns' run defense ranked 7th in the league, giving up only 1,566 yards. First overall pick Myles Garrett showed flashes of the dominant player he's become today, and linebacker Joe Schobert even made the Pro Bowl, leading the league with 144 combined tackles. But the offense was catastrophic. Rookie quarterback Deshaun Kaiser threw 22 interceptions to just 11 touchdowns, and the backups Kevin Hogan and Cody Kessler didn't provide much relief. No matter how good your D is, you're not bailing anybody out of that type of quarterback play. But the Browns weren't the first team to go winless. The 1960 Dallas Cowboys, in their first ever NFL season, finished with a 0-11-1 record, becoming the first post-World War II team to record a .000 winning percentage. This was the first time in league history that an expansion draft took place for a new team. Originally planning to use the nickname Rangers, the franchise switched to Cowboys in March of 1960 to avoid confusion with the local baseball team. Growing pains were expected, but this season was particularly bad. The team's best moment came in Week 11 with a 31-31 tie against the Giants. Dallas ranked dead last in both points scored and points allowed. Quarterback Eddie LeBaron threw for 1,736 yards and 12 touchdowns with 25 interceptions, and their leading rusher L.G. Dupree only finished the year with 362 yards on the ground. From one of the league's most famous franchises to another, and for the Broncos, their early years were defined by some pretty terrible play. The absolute worst period came when they posted identical 2-11-1 records in back-to-back seasons in 1963 and 1964. Some people might point to their 2-7 record in the 1982 season, but trust me, those early 1960s teams were far worse compared to their competition. The 1963 team started with an embarrassing 59-7 blowout loss to the Chiefs and concluded with a blowout loss to the Chargers 58-20. And sandwiched in between all that, they went winless in their final 10 games. In both seasons, the Broncos ranked last in points allowed while also struggling offensively. Although there were only 8 teams in the AFL at the time, things were still really bad. The lone statistical bright spot was cornerback Willie Brown, who recorded 9 interceptions and a safety in 1964 en route to All-Pro First Team honors. You know, it's kind of funny to look back at the start of the 2008 season. Detroit actually entered the year with optimism after going undefeated in the preseason. Although it doesn't mean very much, it still had the team heading in the right direction, but what followed was a season for the ages. Not for the right reasons, for all the wrong reasons. The Lions became the first team in NFL history to go 0-16. Their defense was historically awful, surrendering 517 points while allowing over 32 points per game, which is the 5th worst defense in terms of points allowed in the history of the league. Kind of like when the team struggled with Barry Sanders, one of the greatest running backs ever, they now seem set to ruin future Hall of Fame wide receiver Calvin Johnson. He was the only good thing about the team that year, racking up 1,331 yards and leading the NFL with 12 touchdown catches. 2008 was also the last season for tight end Dan Campbell's playing days, but it lit a fire in him, and now, as the Lions head coach, he's building something special. If a team stacked with future Hall of Famers could become historically bad, I mean, really anything is possible in the NFL. That's exactly what happened to the 1958 Green Bay Packers, who fell to a 1-10-1 record despite having one of the most talented rosters in football at the time. First-year head coach Ray McLean proved entirely incapable of harnessing the talent that he had on this roster. Players like Bart Starr, Paul Hornung, Jim Taylor, Ray Nitschke, and Forrest Gregg. The offense ranked last in the league for points, while the defense surrendered a league-worst 382 points. McLean resigned immediately after the season was over, paving the way for Vince Lombardi's arrival in 1959. Coaching change that would go on to transform the franchise into one of the NFL's greatest dynasties. The Packers had good things coming, but the Houston Texans, yeah, they're finally looking promising today, but back in 2005, they were the laughing stock of the league. It was just a few years after their expansion season, and let's just say, things took a while to get going. You might be wondering why I didn't pick their equally bad 2-14 season from 2013. Well, here's the thing. That 2013 team was actually kind of competitive. They lost 9 games by just 1 score, and they were coming off a franchise-best 12-4 record the year prior. That was a team that collapsed under the pressure. The 2005 version, they were just playing awful from start to finish. Houston failed to win a single divisional game and went 0-8 on the road after losing the final game of the season to the 49ers 20-17 in overtime. Their offense was so ineffective that the offensive coordinator Chris Palmer was fired just 2 weeks into the year. The root of their problems started with an offensive line that might as well have been made of tissue paper. Quarterback David Carr was sacked a league-high 68 times and he fumbled 17 times. Luckily, he only lost 6 of them, but still, that should tell you how bad the situation really was. Even star wide receiver Andre Johnson could only manage 688 yards and 2 touchdowns. Yeah, I mean, there's nothing else to say here. They were just really bad. Okay, you know you're in a rough spot when I can't even decide which season is your worst ever. The Colts franchise has experienced a lot of hardship, but their absolute worst years are a toss-up between 1982 and 1991. Now, I know some of you guys are thinking, what about the 1981 team that gave up an NFL record 533 points? Don't get me wrong, the defense was awful, setting records for both points and yards allowed, but at least they managed to win 2 of those games. These teams were even worse overall. A strike-shortened 1982 season saw the Baltimore Colts become the second team since the AFL-NFL merger to go winless, posting a 0-8-1 record. But for sheer offensive failure, the 1991 Indianapolis Colts are all on their own.
The Buffalo Bills, they were hammered on Monday night. They had to be angry. They're playing the worst team in football, the Indianapolis Colts. This looked like a blowout going in. Guess what happened? You're right.
The Bills smashed the Colts in Week 7 and again in Week 16. The Colts set NFL records at the time for fewest points, 143, and just 13 offensive touchdowns in a 16-game regular season. Their only win? A 28-27 squeaker against the Jets in Week 11. They scored in single digits in 11 of their 16 games and averaged an outstanding 8.9 points per game. Yeah, they were really that bad. Now, you don't have to go too far back to find the Jags' worst season yet. The state of Florida has produced some truly awful NFL teams over the course of time, and the 2020 Jacksonville Jaguars belong near the top of that list. Their 1-15 record is the worst mark in franchise history. The season started out looking okay with a 27-20 win over the Colts in Week 1. Then followed 15 consecutive losses, though several were agonizingly close, with 4 games decided by 3 points or less. Statistically, the Jags were abysmal, ranking 30th in scoring while surrendering the second most amount of points in the league. The quarterback carousel featured Gardner Minshew, Mike Glennon, and Jake Luton splitting duties, while rookie running back James Robinson provided a tiny glimmer of hope with 1,070 rushing yards on the year. The consolation prize? The first overall pick, which would later become Trevor Lawrence, and as I covered in my video on him, it remains to be seen if that'll even pan out for the Jags. One team who has certainly turned things around is the Kansas City Chiefs. But if you told the fans that in 2012 that they were so close to greatness, there's no way they would believe you. Why didn't I pick their equally bad 2-14 season from 2008, you ask? Well, that team was actually slightly better on both sides of the ball, ranking 26th in scoring offense instead of dead last. Plus, they still had Tony Gonzalez putting up a 1,058-yard, 10-touchdown season in his last year with the team. In 2012, the Chiefs just couldn't win a game in the AFC. Their only victories came against NFC teams. The offense was dead last in scoring with just 13.2 points per game. It's pretty crazy to think that Peyton Manning's Broncos that year scored 30.1 points per game more than double their average points. Matt Castle and Brady Quinn combined for just 8 touchdown passes to 20 interceptions. Running back Jamal Charles provided the main spark though, rushing for 1,509 yards, while Dwayne Bowe also had a pretty good year, finishing with 801 receiving yards. But this was the Chiefs' last losing season to date.
On January 7th, Andy Reid was named the 13th head coach of the Kansas City Chiefs.
It was a moment that began a dynasty and eventually would deliver multiple Super Bowl championships. Before the Raiders became one of the NFL's more successful franchises, they couldn't buy a win in their early AFL days. The 1962 Oakland Raiders are the perfect example of how bad they were, with a 1-13 record. Playing their first season at Frank Ewell Field, the Raiders lost their first 13 games before finally breaking through in their season finale against the Patriots. The coaching instability certainly contributed to their struggles, with head coach Marty Feldman fired after a 0-5 start. The quarterback play was particularly bad too, with starter Cotton Davidson throwing for 1,977 yards, but managing just 7 touchdowns to 23 interceptions. One of their biggest losses was in week number 12 against the Dallas Texans, losing 35-7 in a game where All-Pro Texans running back Abner Haynes tied the single-season touchdown record.
Two of the men who had a lot to do with this victory today. Abner, congratulations on tying that all-time pro touchdown record.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you very much.
But just like a few of the other teams on this list, this season proved to be a turning point for the team. Al Davis took over for 3 seasons as the head coach before moving to an ownership role in 1966, and by the 1967 season, they were competing in the Super Bowl. The San Diego Chargers struck gold in a different way with their worst year. Coming off an 8-8 season in 1999, the Chargers completely collapsed, finishing with a 1-15 record. They lost their first 11 games before finally managing to win 17-16 over the Chiefs in Week 13. A John Carney field goal from 52 yards out gave them the lead with just 2 minutes and 14 seconds left to play. They were able to close that game out. The 2000 Chargers had a laughably bad rushing attack that year, totaling just 1,062 yards on the season, which was the lowest in NFL history for a 16-game season. Their quarterback situation was equally disastrous, with Ryan Leaf playing his final season with the team after being selected 2nd overall in 1998.
Peyton Manning, Ryan Leaf.
2 can't-miss rookie quarterbacks.
Both have potential to be stars for a long, long time.
Yeah, so much for that. Leaf became one of the biggest busts in history, while Manning turned into one of the greatest players in history. Thankfully, after this year, the Chargers drafted LaDainian Tomlinson in 2001, who would later transform this franchise, and their rushing attack would become one of the most awe-inspiring in the NFL.
Charger fans are witnesses to history!
The 2000 Chargers set a new standard for terrible offenses, but the 2009 St. Louis Rams, let's just say they somehow managed to sink even lower. As recently as 2001, the Rams were the most electrifying team in the league when everybody was healthy, or I guess you could mention the 2021 team that won the Super Bowl, but, you know, I'm pretty sure majority of people are taking that 2001 team.
The NFL is a pass-first league, and over the last decade, several offenses have left their mark by overwhelming defenses and rewriting record books. But none of those offenses were greater than the greatest show on turf.
But by 2009, the magic, it was gone. In Steve Spagnuolo's first season as head coach, the Rams delivered a 1-15 campaign that some football historians consider the worst team fielded since the expansion Buccaneers. Just look at the stats. The Rams scored just 175 points, which averages 10.9 per game, and this is mind-blowing that they averaged less than 1 point per drive. Although I guess it's to be expected when you score 10 or fewer points in 9 of your games. Their only win came against the Lions, and remember, this is the same Lions team that went 0-16 the year before, so that's definitely not saying much. The 2009 Rams team was a long way from the greatest show on turf. Mark Bulger, Kyle Bowler, and Keith Null combined for just 11 touchdowns to 21 interceptions. The lone standout was running back Steven Jackson, who rushed for 1,416 yards on a team where the leading receiver managed just 589 yards. If you need a little bit more proof of how bad this team was, they actually showed Pee Wee football highlights instead of Rams highlights in week number 17. How exactly do you top that? Well, the 2007 Miami Dolphins, they're going to give it a shot. It followed the unexpected departure of head coach Nick Saban, who had repeatedly denied rumors that he was going to be leaving for Alabama before doing exactly that. New head coach Cam Cameron's tenure would last just one season as the Dolphins narrowly avoided going winless. Their lone victory came in week 15 in a 22-16 overtime game against the Ravens when Cleo Lemon connected with Greg Camarillo on a 64-yard touchdown to seal their lone win. Before that breakthrough, Miami came painfully close on multiple occasions to winning games, losing by just 3 or fewer points 6 different times. Trent Green, Cleo Lemon, and John Beck all failed to establish any consistency at quarterback, making them painful to watch all season long. Despite the team's struggles, they did make history by participating in the first ever regular season NFL game at London's Wembley Stadium.
We welcome you to historic Wembley Stadium in London, England, where better than 90,000 fans gather to witness the first regular season game played outside of North America.
It was a low-scoring game, but fans flocked from all across the UK and Europe to treat it like a mini Super Bowl. So at least the Dolphins made some kind of good history that year. As for the Minnesota Vikings, you have to go back a bit further, all the way back to 1962 to be precise. In their second year in the NFL, the team finished 2-11-1, giving them a horrible win percentage that they've thankfully never matched since then, although they came close in 2011. The season started just about as good as you would expect, with back-to-back 34-7 losses to the Packers and the Colts. Minnesota's only wins that year came in consecutive weeks against the Rams and the Eagles during the middle of the season. Despite the team's struggles, there were glimpses of future greatness. Second-year quarterback Fran Tarkenton threw for 2,595 yards and 22 touchdowns. Not bad if you ignore the 25 interceptions. The other guys didn't exactly help either. Vikings quarterbacks threw combined 30 interceptions, and running back Tommy Mason added on another, while the defense surrendered a league-worst 410 points. Almost 3 decades later, the 1990 New England Patriots matched the quality of those early Vikings with a stunning 1-15 collapse. What made this Patriots team particularly shocking was how quickly they had fallen from contention. Just 5 years removed from a Super Bowl appearance, the Patriots hired Rod Rust as head coach, hoping to improve their 5-11 record from 1989. The season actually started with promise, a narrow 27-24 loss against Miami, followed by their lone victory over the Colts in week number 2. Then came a complete implosion. New England lost their final 14 games, tying a few other teams for the most consecutive losses in a single season. The Patriots scored only 181 points while surrendering 446, giving them a massive negative 265 point differential. While the 1990 Patriots at least began their season with promise, the 1980 New Orleans Saints experienced an epic collapse that transformed the team's identity. Coming off an 8-8 season, the Saints plummeted to a 1-15 record that helped encourage the infamous Aints nickname and the tradition of fans wearing paper bags over their heads. The defense was really bad. New Orleans gave up 487 points while allowing opponents to consistently march up and down the field. Their 0-12 start led to head coach Dick Nolan's firing, which didn't really help much as they went 1-3 the rest of the year under Dick Stanfel. Despite the team's struggles, quarterback Archie Manning delivered one of the best seasons of his career, throwing for a career-high 3,716 yards and 23 touchdowns, though his 20 interceptions are a good indicator of how desperate the situation was around him.
It was just a luck of the draw for Archie. Archie's a great football player, and had he gone with a team like the Raiders or the Pittsburgh or whatever, they'd be talking about Archie Manning right now as one of the great quarterbacks of all time.
The team's only victory came in Week 15 in a 21-20 showing against the Jets, helping them avoid becoming the first 0-16 team in NFL history. One team who might be worse than the Saints, the 1966 New York Giants. Want to know just how bad the Giants defense was in 1966? Well, they gave up 501 points in 14 games, an average of 35.8 points per game, setting an NFL record for the most points allowed in a 14-game season. This record amount of points given up in just 14 games still stands to this day, which is not something that you want to be known for. They also can say that they took part in the highest scoring game in NFL history, except maybe they don't want to say that they took part in this game because it was a 72-41 loss to Washington. And that was just the beginning of a 3-game stretch where they allowed more than 45 points in every game. 30 years later, the 1996 New York Jets delivered a complete organizational collapse as well. After a disappointing 3-13 season in 1995, the Jets somehow managed to get even worse, finishing with a 1-15 record. The quarterback position was a revolving door of mediocrity, with Frank Wright, Neil O'Donnell, and Glenn Foley combining to throw 30 interceptions and only 22 touchdowns. The team ranked 27th in scoring while surrendering 454 points, the second most in the league. Rookie first overall pick Keyshawn Johnson did have a decent year with 844 yards and 8 touchdowns, and Victor Green led the league with 165 combined tackles and 123 solo tackles, but there wasn't much else to write home about. The disaster led to head coach Rich Kotite stepping down before the season even finished. Not exactly a banner year for New York football. As for the recent Super Bowl champs, you're going to have to go all the way back to 1936 to find the Eagles' worst season. Under owner/coach Bert Bell, who would later become the NFL commissioner, the Eagles stumbled to a 1-11 record. This season started promisingly with a 10-7 win over the Giants in the opener, then came an offensive drought of epic proportions. The Eagles were shut out in 6 of their final 11 games, including a streak of 4 in a row. Philadelphia scored just 51 points all season long while allowing 206, both league worsts. Despite this disastrous beginning, the franchise's fortunes would eventually turn around, winning NFL championships in both 1948 and 1949. While the 1936 Eagles' misery came during the NFL's early era, the 1969 Pittsburgh Steelers delivered their worst season at a pivotal moment in franchise history. Though they went 1-13, this disastrous campaign actually laid the foundation for one of the NFL's greatest dynasties. I know some history buffs might point to the winless 1944 season as their worst, but I'm not going to count that one. As I mentioned towards the beginning of this video, that was the team that was merged with the Cardinals due to the wartime player shortages, so that doesn't really count. The 1969 season was the first for legendary head coach Chuck Noll, as well as defensive lineman Mean Joe Green, who many fans consider the greatest Steelers draft pick of all time.
Is there a better name than Mean Joe Green?
That team before Joe Green just did this, we go over the center, and just said, I'm going to go here. I'm going to knock your head off. The whole thing changed.
Change did come, but didn't come in 1969. For starters, the quarterback position was a complete mess. Dick Shiner, that could be a better name than Mean Joe Green possibly. Terry Hanratty and Kent Nix combined for 29 interceptions. Roy Jefferson did manage to earn All-Pro first-team honors with 1,079 receiving yards, and Joe Green recorded 9.5 sacks on his way to Defensive Rookie of the Year, but maybe the best thing to happen all year came at the very end of the season. The Steelers won a coin toss for the first overall pick in the 1970 draft, where they selected Terry Bradshaw. Within 3 years, they would become a powerhouse, ultimately winning 4 Super Bowls in just the 1970s. While the Steelers' 1969 disaster launched a dynasty, by 2004, San Francisco 49ers must have felt further from their glory days than ever. It's kind of hard to pick the worst season for the Niners, as they've actually had 2 win seasons a bunch of different times. In 1963, 1978, 1979, 2004, and 2016 to be exact. So, why am I selecting the 2004 season? Well, those other teams actually had some redeeming qualities to them. The 1979 team had a middle-of-the-pack offense. The 2016 squad had decent production from Colin Kaepernick and Carlos Hyde, and both the 1963 and 1978 teams had better defensive units than the 2004 team. The 2004 team they were just brutal across the board. It all went wrong in the offseason. The 49ers lost 3 key offensive players because of cap issues. Quarterback Jeff Garcia was released to save some space. Running back Garrison Hurst departed for Denver, and star receiver Terrell Owens joined Philadelphia. Losing those guys pretty much gutted what had been a competitive roster. The 49ers won just 2 games, both against the Cardinals, both in overtime, and both by identical 31-28 scores. Their lowlights included a 34-0 shutout loss to Seattle and a 41-7 thrashing by Buffalo. Now, the 2004 49ers collapse was certainly painful to watch, but the 1992 Seattle Seahawks might have been even more embarrassing. In head coach Tom Flores' first season, Seattle stumbled to a 2-14 record. What makes this Seahawks team truly historic is how bad they were on offense. They scored just 140 points all season, which equated to 8.8 points per game, the lowest total for any team in a 16-game regular season in NFL history. At one point, they scored just 1 touchdown over a 6-week period. Quarterbacks Kelly Stouffer, Stan Gelbaugh, and Dan McGuire combined for just 9 touchdowns to 23 interceptions. And to add insult to injury, their leading pass catcher was a fullback, John Williams, with just 556 yards. The irony is that Seattle's defense was actually pretty dang good. Defensive tackle Cortez Kennedy dominated with 14 sacks, earning NFL Defensive Player of the Year honors despite the team's terrible record. Eugene Robinson also made the Pro Bowl that season at free safety. If only they could move the ball a bit. Speaking of not moving the ball, let's take a look at the 1976 Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They're probably the first true disaster in the modern NFL era. As an expansion franchise in their first season, they went 0-14, becoming the first team to play an entire season without winning a single game since the 1960 Cowboys. So what exactly went so wrong here? Well, they were terrible on both sides of the ball. They were shut out 5 times, including their first 2 games, and never scored more than 20 points in a game all season long. By the end of the year, they put up just 125 points while giving up 412. They didn't score their first points until their 3rd game, and they didn't find the end zone until their 4th game. Quarterback Steve Spurrier, yes, the future college coaching legend, threw for 1,628 yards with 7 touchdowns and 12 interceptions. This season marked the beginning of an NFL post-merger record 26-game losing streak, as the Bucs wouldn't win their first game until December of 1977.
We won't go 0-14 again. That's not going to happen. And it nearly did.
But they're not the only team who were terrible in back-to-back years. While the Buccaneers at least had the excuse of being an expansion team, the Houston Oilers, now the Tennessee Titans, somehow went 1-13 in 1972 and in 1973. Now, I could have picked their 1-8 record in the 1982 season or their 2-14 disaster in 1994, but these back-to-back squads were just on another level of bad. In 1973, their only win came in Week 3 against the Jets, winning 26-20, followed immediately by a humiliating 34-0 Monday Night Football loss to the Raiders. 1973 was even worse. The defense completely collapsed, allowing 447 points, the most ever in a 14-game regular season up to that point in time, and their point differential of -248 is one of the 10 worst in NFL history. Quarterback Dan Pastorini was under constant pressure, leading the league with 17 total fumbles. At the time, 17 total fumbles was the most in history for a quarterback. And the reason that I keep saying total fumbles and not fumbles is because I don't know how many of these Dan Pastorini actually lost. In 1961, the then Washington Redskins had a season that could give any one of these teams a run for their money. With head coach Bill McPeak in his first year, the team stumbled to a 1-12-1 record, and they almost went the entire year without a win. The season started with a 35-3 beatdown by the 49ers and continued to deteriorate from there on out. They didn't win until the final game of the regular season, week number 14, when they finally defeated the Cowboys, which is the same team that they tied with in week 10. At one point, they had to battle through a brutal 4-week stretch that included 3 shutout losses: 20-0 to the Steelers in week 5, 24-0 to the St. Louis Cardinals in week 6, and an embarrassing 53-0 annihilation by the Giants in week 8. Quarterback Norm Snead threw for 2,337 yards and 11 touchdowns, but also threw 22 interceptions, while the team's leading rusher, Dick James, managed just 374 yards on the ground. Now, it's easy to sit here and hate on the teams who are struggling, but as we've seen, sometimes greatness can rise out of the worst situations. Whether you draft the next great NFL talent or one of your players goes on to be a badass coach. Most draft picks do not work out, and the truth is the odds only get worse the further down the draft board you go. But every once in a while, a team finds a hidden gem so special that it makes the rest of the league look completely foolish for passing on them over and over again. And yes, I know what you're thinking. Your mind immediately goes to Tom Brady. But there's a couple teams who might have done just as good at finding that needle in the haystack, if not better. So today we are going through what I believe is the biggest draft steal in the history of every NFL team. And I will say before we start that I'm putting a lot of emphasis on draft position. So for this video, the lower the draft position, the better their chances are. And also, this video is presented to you by Prize Picks. Starting with the Jaguars, I'm going to go with Maurice Jones-Drew, who was taken 60th overall in 2006. He was nowhere near the biggest guy on the field, standing in at just 5'7", but what he lacked in height, he balanced out with his weight at 210 pounds. Jones-Drew had this low center of gravity that made him almost impossible to bring down. And it wasn't just his running ability that made him so valuable. He was also an elite blocker who was definitely not afraid of contact. By 2011, he was leading the entire NFL in rushing with 1,606 yards and 11 total touchdowns. What made that season even more impressive was the situation around him. The Jaguars were not a good team, which meant every defense knew exactly what was coming. They stacked the box with 8 or even 9 defenders at times, daring Jacksonville to throw the ball, but it didn't matter. Jones-Drew still dominated. He earned first-team All-Pro that season and made 3 Pro Bowls overall. MJD finished second in franchise history behind only Fred Taylor as the Jaguars' all-time rushing leader with 8,071 yards and 13,115 all-purpose yards. Could I have gone with David Garrard here? Sure. But without Jones-Drew leading the rushing attack, I don't think Garrard would even be in the conversation. Next up, we've got the Texans, and I feel like the correct option is Owen Daniels. He came out of Wisconsin in 2006 as the 98th overall pick, caught 5 touchdowns as a rookie, and quickly became the go-to tight end for Matt Schaub in Houston. Daniels was never the flashiest player on the field, but he was incredibly reliable, and that's what made him so valuable. He made the Pro Bowl in 2008 and 2012, helping Houston reach the playoffs twice during that stretch. Obviously, Arian Foster would be getting the nod here because he's one of the best Texans ever, but since he went undrafted, he does not count for today's list, and Daniels gets my vote. Throughout his 8 years with Houston, Daniels caught 385 passes for 4,617 yards and 29 touchdowns. Sometimes the biggest steals aren't the loudest names, but instead the players who show up every single week and do not let you down. Okay, let's hop over to the Ravens now. Adalys Thomas was a 6th rounder who ended up being one of the better defensive players of his era. What made Thomas so dangerous was the fact that he could do a little bit of everything. He could rush the passer, drop back in coverage, play linebacker, and wreck special teams plays. In 2006, he had a sensational year, including 83 tackles, 11 sacks, a pick, a safety, and a fumble return touchdown. He earned first-team All-Pro honors and was a big part of the #1 ranked defense in the NFL that season. After that monster year, Thomas signed with the Patriots on a 5-year, $35 million contract. But while he was on Baltimore, he made 2 Pro Bowls and got a Super Bowl ring during his rookie year, even though he barely saw the field. Not many teams are taking guys in the 9th round and expecting much. But when Minnesota picked Scott Studwell 250th overall in 1977, they got one of the most underrated linebackers in the league. By 1980, he was starting and having an impact on every single game. And in 1981, Studwell set the Vikings single-season tackle record with 230. He had a reputation as one of the most durable and high-volume tacklers in the league. Towards the end of his time with the Vikings, Studwell made 2 Pro Bowls and eventually became the Minnesota all-time leading tackler with 1,981 in his career. Now I know some Vikings fans might be upset that I didn't pick 6-time Pro Bowler Matt Burke here, but getting a 9th round steal like Studwell is just too rare for me to pass up. Weirdly enough, we are double dipping with the 1977 draft once again. The Jets took Joe Klecko in the 6th round, 144th overall, and got a guy who spent the next decade making life miserable for opposing offenses. He could play defensive end or nose tackle, and he was a problem anywhere he lined up. Klecko was a huge part of the Jets' famous New York sack exchange, even coming away with 20.5 sacks in 1981, which was just insane numbers, especially back then. Klecko played 11 years for the Jets, making 4 Pro Bowls and 2 All-Pro first teams before eventually being inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2023. Alright, for the Chiefs, I'm going to go with Will Shields. He came out of Nebraska in 1993 as the 74th overall pick and went on to become one of the most durable offensive linemen the NFL has ever seen. He started 15 out of 16 games as a rookie, and throughout his entire 14-year career, the guy never missed a single game. Shields played in 224 consecutive games and played at a high level almost every single time. He made 12 Pro Bowls and was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2015. For a 3rd round pick, that's a hell of a steal. Newer Chiefs fans might be upset that I didn't pick Tyreek Hill here, who was drafted in the 5th round, 165th overall. But I really don't feel like Shields' 14 years without missing a single game is comparable to 6 good seasons that Hill had in Kansas City. The older Chiefs fans might be asking about Bobby Bell, drafted in the 7th round, 56th overall, who made the Hall of Fame in 1983 for being one of the best linebackers in the AFL days. If you want to swap those two out, I don't really have a problem with it. At the end of the day, this is a highly opinion-based list. Cincinnati took Tim Krumrie in the 10th round, 276th overall back in 1983, so this one felt like a no-brainer. He was a nose tackle who played football at Wisconsin in college, and he was beloved by his Bengals teammates due to his insane level of toughness. If being drafted that late and still winning over his teammates wasn't impressive enough, Krumrie worked his way up to being a full-time starter by just his 2nd year. Eventually, in 1987, he made his first Pro Bowl, and the very next year, he made the All-Pro first team after recording 152 tackles on the year. I do want to say that Geno Atkins caught my eye when I was doing research for the Bengals. The guy was a steal in the 4th round of the 2010 draft who made 8 Pro Bowls and 2 All-Pro first teams, but you just can't beat the value that Cincy got out of that 10th round pick with Krumrie. Okay, if you watched the Titans in the late 2000s, you know exactly who Cortland Finnegan was. This guy loved getting under people's skin, and he didn't back down from a fight, even if he didn't win. Tennessee took him 215th overall in the 2006 draft. By his 2nd year, he was a full-time starter, and in 2008, he had a legendary season in large part thanks to Albert Haynesworth wreaking havoc on the defensive line. Finnegan had 5 picks, one of which was returned for a touchdown, and finished with 69 tackles. The stats don't truly explain how important he was to the Titans that year. They even made the playoffs before eventually losing to the Ravens in the divisional round. Finnegan played 6 years for Tennessee before venturing to St. Louis, Miami, and Carolina. Truly a steal here, especially at 215th overall. Now let's move on to the Saints, who took Marcus Colston 252nd overall in 2006. As nearly the last pick in the entire draft, he had no choice but to put his head down and prove everyone wrong. Colston did exactly that when he put up 1,038 scrimmage yards as a rookie. That was no fluke either. He spent 10 seasons in New Orleans and became the franchise's all-time leader in receptions, receiving yards, and touchdowns. Him and Drew Brees had a great connection, and New Orleans wouldn't have won a Super Bowl if it wasn't for these two being on the same page. The Falcons took running back Jamal Anderson in the 7th round, 201st overall in 1994. After battling his way up the depth chart for his first 2 years, he finally got a chance to start in 1996, and he made it count. Anderson carried the ball 232 times and ended with 1,528 yards from scrimmage. After securing his job, 1998 was when he really shined. Atlanta handed him the ball 410 times, which was an NFL record until Larry Johnson eventually broke it. He had 2,165 yards from scrimmage and 16 total touchdowns, made the Pro Bowl, and basically carried the Falcons all the way to Super Bowl 33. His career was unfortunately cut short due to a brutal ACL tear, but what he did in that one season alone makes him one of the best 7th round picks the Falcons have ever made. Joe Schmidt fell to the 7th round in 1953 because of injuries he picked up in college at Pittsburgh. The Lions took a chance on him and he repaid them by helping them win the NFL championship in his very first year. He went on to make 10 straight Pro Bowls and 9 straight All-Pro teams, with 8 of them being first-team appearances. He was the defensive captain, the guy calling plays on the fly, and the one opposing offenses had a game plan around every single week. In the 1957 championship game, he contributed with an interception that helped Detroit win its 3rd title in 6 years. Schmidt got into the Hall of Fame in 1973 as one of the best 7th round steals in history. I do have to say, people are going to be mad that I didn't pick Amon-Ra St. Brown for this spot, but I think he needs to perform a few more years before we can say it's the biggest draft steal in Lions history. For the Browns, we're going with Leroy Kelly, who was an 8th round pick in 1964. For his first couple seasons, he was a backup because the guy in front of him was Jim Brown, so yeah, it's kind of hard to complain about that one. When Brown retired, Kelly took over and did not miss a beat. He led the NFL in rushing in both 1967 and 1968 and made 6 Pro Bowls. He finished with 9,555 scrimmage yards and was eventually inducted into the Hall of Fame. Then we've got another 8th round draft pick, but this guy was selected 203rd overall. The Bears took Richard Dent in 1983, and he went on to become the MVP of one of the most dominant Super Bowl performances in NFL history. In 1984, Dent finished with 17.5 sacks. Then the very next year, he led the NFL with 17 sacks. That Bears defense was already terrifying, but adding Dent to the equation amplified it even more. Chicago made it all the way to the Super Bowl and dismantled the Patriots 46-10. He finished his career with 137.5 sacks, which was 3rd all-time when he retired, only behind Reggie White and Bruce Smith. Pretty crazy to look back on, especially knowing that he was drafted in the 8th round. Linebacker Rod Martin was taken in the 12th round, and to me seems like the biggest steal in Raiders franchise history. I mean, when you get an All-Pro at 317th overall, it's something special. And just like Dent, Martin ended up having a very memorable Super Bowl performance of his own. In Super Bowl 15 against the Eagles, he intercepted 3 passes, which is still a record to this day. The Raiders won 27-10, and Martin was all over the field. He made 2 Pro Bowls with the Raiders along with 2 All-Pro teams and called it a career after 12 years with the franchise. Back in 1979, the Buccaneers took David Logan 307th overall in the 12th round. He became a starting nose tackle in his 2nd year and anchored that defensive line for the better part of a decade. He finished with 38.8 sacks and helped Tampa Bay reach the playoffs twice in the early 80s, back when the team was still trying to find its footing. Now listen, I could have easily gone with Hall of Fame cornerback Rondé Barber here, but at a 12th round value, Logan was a huge steal. Okay, for Miami, it's gotta be Zach Thomas. He was taken in the 5th round in 1996, 154th overall. He fell because he was considered undersized for a linebacker, standing in at just 5'11", which caused a lot of teams to pass on him. Thankfully, Miami pulled the trigger and got one of the best defensive players of his era. Thomas finished his career with 1,734 total tackles, 7 Pro Bowls, 5 first-team All-Pro selections, and a spot on the Hall of Fame All-2000s team. Along with all those accomplishments, he was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2023. You really can't ask for much more than that from your 5th round guy. But if you think late round steals are impressive now, just imagine taking a guy in the 18th round back in 1965 and he turns out to be a future Hall of Fame linebacker. This is Chris Hanburger, and I'd say he turned out to be quite a bit better than your average 18th round pick. He found his way into the starting lineup as a rookie and never really looked back. The guy had 9 Pro Bowl appearances, 3 first-team All-Pro selections, and 19 career interceptions. He helped Washington reach the Super Bowl in the 1972 season and was named to the NFL's 1970s All-Decade team. Hamburger was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2011 and is easily one of the latest round steals in this video. One thing that helps is when you make not 1, but 2 All-Decade teams. Larry Wilson was a 7th round pick out of Utah. He was considered undersized for a defensive back at 6 foot, 190 pounds, but what teams missed was that he was tough as nails and was determined to be a menace. He was one of the first players to really utilize the safety blitz. He'd come from deep in the secondary and offensive coordinators had no idea what to do with him. In 1965, he played an entire game with both hands in cast and still intercepted a pass. In 1966, he led the NFL with 10 interceptions, including picks in 7 straight games, and came in second in MVP voting. Wilson finished with 52 career interceptions and was inducted into the Hall of Fame right once he became eligible in 1978. Alright, moving on, the next player up is quarterback Roger Staubach, who was a 10th round pick in 1964. But he didn't even join the Cowboys until 1969 because he had a 4-year military commitment to fulfill with the Navy. Dallas essentially drafted him and decided it would be worth the wait. Turns out, they were right. He led the Cowboys to 2 Super Bowl wins, 1 Super Bowl VI MVP after going undefeated as a starter that year, and became one of the most clutch quarterbacks the league has ever seen. The Hail Mary to Drew Pearson in the 1975 NFC divisional round is still one of the most iconic plays in NFL history. Staubach threw for over 22,000 yards, rushed for over 2,200 more, and made 6 Pro Bowls before retiring as one of the most respected players of his era. He also made the All-1970s team and was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 1985. From one legendary quarterback to another, the Packers took Bart Starr 200th overall in 1956, and he's another huge steal. As you'd expect for a guy drafted that late, it was a while before he really got going. But when he did, he went on to win 5 NFL championships with 2 Super Bowl MVPs. But one of his most famous games was in the Ice Bowl in 1967. In freezing conditions, with 13 seconds left, the Cowboys were on the goal line. Starr called his own number on a quarterback sneak and scored the game-winning touchdown. He threw for nearly 25,000 yards over 16 years and got into the Hall of Fame in 1977. The guy is for sure one of the greatest late-round picks the NFL has ever seen, and he came away as a 2-time Super Bowl champion. Now let's hop over to the Colts, and this was a pretty tough one. We've got to give it to Raymond Berry, who was selected 232nd overall in 1954. He wasn't all that fast or physically imposing, but he was obsessive about his craft. He studied film constantly and ran routes in a way that made him almost impossible to cover. Berry became the go-to target for Johnny Unitas and had 9,275 yards and 68 touchdowns over his career. In the 1958 NFL Championship, known as the greatest game ever played, he caught 12 passes for 178 yards and a touchdown in the overtime win. He led the league in receiving yards 3 different times and retired as the all-time leader in receptions and receiving yards. What made this decision tough is that Robert Mathis is absolutely worth mentioning here. He was a 5th round pick in 2003 who finished with 123 career sacks and 52 forced fumbles, which is still the most in NFL history. He also made 5 Pro Bowls and got a Super Bowl ring, but Berry being taken in the 20th round and becoming a Hall of Famer is something I couldn't overlook. The Giants took Rosie Brown in the 27th round in 1953, which was 322nd overall, meaning he was basically an afterthought. But he turned into one of the greatest offensive linemen in the 50s and 60s. He started right away and helped the Giants make 6 playoff appearances. All in all, he had 9 Pro Bowl appearances, 6 first-team All-Pro selections, and was a key part of the 1956 championship team. He was also inducted into the Hall of Fame in 1975. A guy taken in the 27th round becoming a Hall of Famer, not much can top that. The Rams took Deacon Jones, 186th overall in the 14th round of the 1961 draft. Everyone who passed on him multiple times found out pretty quickly why that was a huge mistake. He spent the next decade making offensive linemen's lives really difficult, becoming one of the most impactful defensive players the game has ever seen. Just look at this string of 5 seasons when he hit his peak. 22, 19, 16, 21.5, 22, and 15 sacks. On top of all that, he made 8 Pro Bowls, 5 first-team All-Pro selections, was in the MVP conversation twice, even coming in second in the 1967 voting, and made it into the Hall of Fame in 1980. Getting one of the most dominant pass rushers of his era that late in the draft is just insane value. But grabbing Richard Sherman in the 5th round at pick 154 is arguably just as impressive, considering how quickly he became one of the top corners in the league, right up there with prime Darrelle Revis. By his second season, Sherman was first-team All-Pro and led the league with 24 pass deflections. The next year, he led the NFL with 8 interceptions. He was a huge part of the Legion of Boom, a defense so good that they destroyed Peyton Manning's record-breaking offense in that 43-8 Super Bowl win. When he retired, he had 5 Pro Bowl appearances, 3 first-team All-Pro selections, and a spot on the 2010s All-Decade team. And if you thought you've seen some studs already, stick around because you are not going to want to miss these final 8 guys. For the Eagles, their biggest steal has got to be Jason Kelce, who went 191st overall in 2011. It's easy to forget that they drafted him so late, considering he won the starting job as a rookie and basically held it for the next 13 years. With Kelce, it's easy to see the New Heights podcast clips and overlook how good he really was. But he's a lock for the Hall of Fame and easily one of the best centers to ever play. He was a 7-time Pro Bowler, earned 6 All-Pro first-team appearances, and they won a Super Bowl in the 2017 season. I don't know if that would have been possible without him. I'd say this was a pretty damn good return on investment for Philly. Up next is the Panthers, and when they took Steve Smith in the 3rd round, what they got was one of the most competitive receivers the NFL has ever seen. The guy was 5'9" and played like he had something to prove every single week. In 2005, he led the NFL in receptions, receiving yards, and touchdowns all in the same season. The Triple Crown is actually a lot more rare than you'd think, especially in today's game. He's one of only 4 guys to win it since 1992. The crazy thing is, if you look at some of the other names that have won it, like Jerry Rice, Cooper Kupp, or Jamar Chase, for example, you realize they had great quarterbacks throwing them the ball. Smith did it with Jake Delhomme. He finished with 15,118 yards from scrimmage across 16 seasons, along with making 5 Pro Bowls and 2 All-Pro first teams. The Chargers took Dan Fouts in 1973 with the 64th overall pick out of Oregon, and for a few years he didn't look like anything too special. He went 0-5-1 as a rookie, 3-8 the next year, and 2-7 the year after that. But once Don Coryell arrived as head coach in 1978, everything changed. Fouts threw for over 4,000 yards in a season 3 straight years from 1979 until 1981, which sounds normal now but was pretty insane at the time. He led the NFL in passing yards 4 years running, took the Chargers to back-to-back AFC Championship games, and finished with over 43,000 career passing yards. When he retired, Fouts was 2nd in NFL history. But maybe the most impressive year he had was in 1982, and it doesn't get talked about enough. Over just 9 games in the strike-shortened season, he threw for 2,883 yards, which means he would have been on pace for well over 5,000 in a full year. It could have been even more than the record Dan Marino set in 1984. The Bills are up next, and they had an amazing steal with Andre Reed. They took him during the 4th round in 1985, 86th overall, and got one of the best receivers of all time. He made 7 straight Pro Bowls and appeared in 4 consecutive Super Bowls with Buffalo. His best moment had to be in the playoffs against Houston in the 1992 season. The Bills were down 35-3 early in the 3rd quarter, and instead of giving up, Reed caught 3 touchdown passes as Buffalo pulled off an insane comeback, winning 41-38 in overtime. He finished with 13,698 yards from scrimmage and 88 total touchdowns before getting into the Hall of Fame in 2014. Alright, now we're getting towards the biggest steals in history. Next up is Joe Montana. The 49ers took him in the 3rd round in 1979, 82nd overall out of Notre Dame. He only had 1 start as a rookie. Played a bit more the next year, but it was 1981 when he really arrived. What followed was one of the greatest quarterback careers the NFL has ever seen. 4 Super Bowl rings, 3 Super Bowl MVPs, back-to-back league MVPs in 1989 and 1990, and the leader of some of the most impressive drives in NFL history. He's the kind of player where the bigger the moment, the better his performance every single time. he finished with 40,551 passing yards and a 92.3 career passer rating, along with a perfect 4-0 record in the Super Bowl. When he got there, he certainly lived up to the nickname Joe Cool. But we're going to have Antonio Brown as an even bigger steal. Not because he had a better career than Montana, it's because Pittsburgh took him in the 6th round in 2010, 195th overall. At that point in the draft, you're just hoping a guy makes the roster, but Brown became the best receiver in the NFL during his prime and made cornerbacks look silly in the process. In 2014, he led the league in both receptions and receiving yards. He had 6 straight 1,000-yard seasons with the Steelers and earned 4 first-team All-Pro selections. 3 different times he finished top 3 in Offensive Player of the Year voting. This guy was impossible to cover. Obviously, towards the end, there was a lot of off-field stuff that kind of takes away from all that, but during his prime with the Steelers, he was as dominant as any receiver in the league. Before we move on, I do have to give a shout out to Mike Webster, who I almost picked here, made the Hall of Fame for Pittsburgh after being drafted 125th overall. I just feel like if Brown didn't suffer from all the CTE, he would have been easily a first ballot Hall of Famer. And ironically enough, after retiring, Webster's life basically got ruined by CTE, so I guess these guys both have that in common. Broncos actually had 2 ridiculous steals that I want to mention. First up is Terrell Davis, who was drafted in the 6th round, 196th overall in 1995. By his second season, he was right up there with Barry Sanders as the best running back in the league with 1,848 yards from scrimmage, becoming first-team All-Pro and winning Offensive Player of the Year. In 1998, he ran for 2,008 yards and won the MVP. Depending on who you ask, this guy was the best postseason rusher of all time, putting up ridiculous numbers. In Super Bowl 32 against the Packers, he ran for 157 yards and 3 touchdowns while dealing with a migraine so bad he was getting sick on the sideline. His knees gave out in his prime and he only played 7 seasons, with the last 3 basically not even counting, but he still made the Hall of Fame in 2017. We also have to mention Shannon Sharpe. He was a 7th round pick out of Savannah State who made 8 Pro Bowls, 4 first-team All-Pro appearances, and got into the Hall of Fame in 2011. I feel like TD edges him out here as the Broncos' biggest steal, but this one was really close. The thing that makes Davis so impressive is that Denver doesn't win those 2 Super Bowls without him. That's the definition of a ridiculous steal. Grabbing a guy in the 6th round and going on to win back-to-back Super Bowls because of it. Speaking of back-to-back Super Bowls, last but certainly not least, you should have all known that Tom Brady would be the final name on today's list. The Pats took him 199th overall in 2000. 6 quarterbacks went ahead of him. Every team in the league passed on him multiple times, which, let's be honest, is the biggest mistake of all time. Brady pretty much put the GOAT debate to rest with 7 Super Bowl rings. In Super Bowl 51, he brought the Patriots back from down 28-3 at halftime and won in overtime. His career numbers are ridiculous and might never be beaten. He threw for 89,214 career yards and 649 touchdowns over 23 seasons. Today we are finding every team's most disappointing quarterback of all time. Obviously there are a ton of guys we could choose from, so I'm going to lay some ground rules on how I selected these players. Number 1, they had to play at least 1 game with the team they were drafted by. Number 2, they had to be drafted in the Super Bowl era. And number 3, higher draft picks are going to carry more weight. First up is Trey Lance, and what makes this one hurt so much is the price San Francisco paid to get him. The 49ers gave up 3 first-round picks and a 3rd rounder just to move up to 3rd overall, betting their entire future on one player. And here's where it gets scary. Lance only appeared in 19 college games at North Dakota State. Because of COVID, he had thrown just 318 total passes, but the part that sold everybody was this: his team never lost a single game with him on the field. So the 49ers convinced themselves they were seeing a winner, even though there was very limited film to study. For a moment, it looked like the gamble might actually work. Lance started twice as a rookie and didn't look overwhelmed. He threw for 603 yards, 5 touchdowns, and posted a 97.3 passer rating.
And here goes the rookie around the left side, and in he goes for the touchdown.
You could see that he had real potential as a dual-threat quarterback, but then 2022 arrived and everything fell apart. After being named the starter for the season, Lance broke his ankle in just his 2nd game. That opened the door for Brock Purdy to step in, who was the final pick of the 2022 draft. With Lance and Jimmy Garoppolo both hurt, Purdy came in and went 5-0 as a starter. By 2023, Lance was healthy again, but Purdy had the job locked down, so the 49ers traded Lance to Dallas for a 4th-round pick in August. After all that investment, all that belief, it ended quietly. With San Francisco, Lance went 2-2 as a starter with 797 yards, 5 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions. After 1 year backing up Dak Prescott, he is now a backup with the Chargers behind Justin Herbert. The only reason this disaster didn't destroy the 49ers is because Brock Purdy turned out to be special. Without him, this trade likely would have cost multiple people their jobs. Next up are the Bears, a franchise with a long and painful history of quarterback disasters. Back in 1999, they drafted Cade McNown 12th overall. He lasted 2 seasons, went 3-12, and became known as a locker room cancer. But the Mitch Trubisky pick gets the gold medal for me because he was taken 10 draft slots ahead of McNown. In 2017, Chicago held the 3rd overall pick, but they traded up 1 spot to 2nd overall. In addition to their 1st round pick, they gave up a 3rd rounder, a 4th rounder, and a 2018 3rd round pick. All of that to draft Trubisky. The problem was experience. Trubisky only had 13 college starts because he spent his first 2 seasons as a backup. And to make matters worse, Patrick Mahomes and Deshaun Watson were still on the board when his name was called. For a while, it looked like the Bears might have gotten away with it. In 2018, Trubisky made the Pro Bowl, posted a 95.4 passer rating, and went 11-3 as a starter, while leading Chicago to an NFC North title.
Play action, looking for a wide open receiver, and it's a touchdown for Trey Burton.
He even had some bright spots in 2019.
He keeps again. One-on-one, tackle missed, touchdown, Trubisky.
But over time, the cracks became impossible to ignore. He struggled to read zone coverages, couldn't consistently throw deep, and his decision-making completely unraveled. Meanwhile, Mahomes became a 3-time Super Bowl champion, and Watson became a 3-time Pro Bowler before everything fell apart off the field for him. As for Trubisky, he became a backup quarterback, and that's exactly where he remains today. Now let's go back to the 1999 draft, which was one of the biggest disasters in NFL history. Akili Smith looked the part. He had the arm strength, mobility, size, and confidence, but he had only started 1 full season in college. Then the phone rang. Saints head coach Mike Ditka wanted to draft Ricky Williams so bad that he offered the Bengals every pick in their 1999 draft, plus 1st-round picks in 2000 and 2001, and a 2nd-round pick in 2002. That was 9 total draft picks, one of the largest trade offers in NFL history, but the Bengals stupidly declined. Instead, Smith held out and missed 27 days of training camp. When he finally took the field, it was obvious he wasn't ready. He panicked in the pocket, couldn't read defenses, and spent more time partying than preparing. He went 3-14 as a starter with 5 touchdowns and 13 interceptions over 4 years, and his completion percentage was only 46.6%. The Bengals rejected a historic haul and pretty much wasted an entire decade. You could argue that they didn't truly recover until Carson Palmer took over the starting job in 2004. The 2013 quarterback class was one of the weakest in recent memory. You had E.J. Manuel, Geno Smith, Mike Glennon, and Matt Barkley. Most scouts had 2nd-round grades on all of them, but the Bills were desperate. They had just moved on from Ryan Fitzpatrick and felt like they had to leave this draft with a quarterback. Manuel won Senior Bowl MVP and impressed scouts with his size and leadership in interviews. So at pick 16, Buffalo took him, the only quarterback drafted in the 1st round. And right away, it was immediately called a reach. Manuel started 10 games as a rookie and went 4-6. He showed some athleticism but struggled with accuracy and reading defenses. By his 2nd season, he was benched after 4 games for Kyle Orton. He finished his time in Buffalo 6-11 as a starter with 19 touchdowns and 15 interceptions. In March of 2017, Manuel became a free agent and signed with the Raiders a few weeks later. Unfortunately, his time there didn't last long as he only started 1 game. This is what happens when you draft a player too high and expect him to turn into something that he's not. Which brings us to the Broncos. After Peyton Manning retired following Super Bowl 50, they needed a quarterback big time. John Elway wanted Paxton Lynch, who is 6'7" with a cannon for an arm. The Cowboys wanted him too. Jerry Jones tried to trade up, but Elway grabbed Lynch at pick 26. Lynch first appeared in Week 4 against Tampa Bay, where Denver won 27-7. He looked decent, throwing for 170 yards and a touchdown, but in his first official start the following week, the Broncos lost to Atlanta 23-16. Over 2 seasons, Lynch started in just 4 games.
And by the way, you can tell a lot early. You can tell Carson Wentz is really athletic, and Jared Goff may succeed, but he's going to need help. He'll never carry a franchise. And you can tell Paxton Lynch is not good.
He threw 4 touchdowns and 4 interceptions before being released, finishing 1-3 as a starter. The Cowboys quote-unquote settled for Dak Prescott in the 4th round, who went on to win Offensive Rookie of the Year and is still their starter to this day. Meanwhile, Lynch became the first player ever to be benched in the NFL, CFL, USFL, and the XFL. Tim Couch was the first overall pick in the 1999 draft, but he wasn't a failure because he lacked the talent. He failed because Cleveland let him down. Couch was a solid passer at Kentucky. He had the accuracy, could think quickly, and was a record-setting quarterback in college. Cleveland was technically an expansion team at this point, so their roster was as weak as you could get. And they made a classic mistake, drafting a franchise quarterback without an offensive line or anyone great to throw to. Despite that, he still had some great moments.
Here's a blitz. Couch. Long, high ball. Lots of guys going for it. Fight in the end zone. It's caught by the Browns. The Cleveland Browns have won the game.
But in his rookie year, Couch was sacked 56 times, which was the most in the league. Over his career, he took 166 sacks in just 59 starts. He broke his leg, shattered his thumb, dealt with shoulder injuries, and suffered a bunch of concussions. Despite all that, he actually managed to drag the Browns to the playoffs in 2002. But the fan base turned on him. When he suffered a concussion in one game, the crowd cheered just because Kelly Holcomb was coming in. At the end of the day, he failed because his body was completely broken and he was drafted to a less than ideal organization. Couch went 22-37 as a starter with a 75.1 passer rating. Josh Freeman is different because for a while he actually looked like the answer. Tampa Bay just hasn't had too many disappointing quarterbacks that were high draft picks, so this one was a little tough to choose. The Bucs took Freeman 17th overall in 2009. In 2010, at just 22 years old, he threw for 3,451 yards, 25 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions. The Bucs went 10-6 and had to be thinking they lucked out. Even with a down year in 2011, by 2012 he broke 4,000 passing yards and threw for 27 touchdowns. It felt like he was on the verge of becoming a top 10 quarterback. Pretty soon after, everything collapsed. When the Bucs hired Greg Schiano, he brought a very militant style of coaching that clashed with Freeman's personality. Freeman missed the team photo and Schiano blasted him publicly. By the time the season began, he was no longer a team captain. Word also got out that Freeman was in the NFL's substance abuse program, although he later denied having any drug problem and accused the organization of leaking his medical info to smear him. The relationship was clearly damaged beyond repair. Overall, with Tampa Bay, he went 24-35 as a starter before playing one game with both the Vikings and the Colts. Josh Rosen believed that he was the most polished quarterback in the 2018 draft.
I think I have the skills to be an efficient and quick quarterback. I think I can deliver the ball to my playmakers quickly. I think I can make my I can bring my offensive coordinator's brain onto the field and make sure that we're in the right play at the right times. I think I'm the best CEO of a football team on the field.
But his rookie year turned into a complete disaster. The Cardinals head coach Steve Wilks was a defensive-minded guy without much offensive experience. The offensive coordinator Mike McCoy was fired mid-season. The offensive line was destroyed by injuries, and Rosen was sacked 45 times in just 13 starts. Then it somehow got much worse. Arizona fired Wilks after year number 1 and hired Cliff Kingsbury. Kingsbury wanted Kyler Murray, so the Cardinals drafted Murray first overall and traded Rosen to the Dolphins for a second-round pick. 1 year under a completely dysfunctional team, going 3-10 as a starter, is all Josh Rosen got. He bounced around as a backup for a few more years before fading out completely. In 4 games with the Falcons in 2021, he went 2 for 11 with 2 picks. That was the last we have seen from him on a football field. But an even bigger draft bust has to be Ryan Leaf, who the Chargers picked in the 1998 draft. This draft had a ton of hype. It was a battle between him and Peyton Manning for the #1 pick. The Colts took Manning first, so the Chargers traded up to #2 and grabbed Leaf. In week number 3 of his rookie year against Kansas City, Leaf went 1 for 15 for 4 yards and lost 3 fumbles.
We played a horrific game. The one guy who played as poorly as you could play was Ryan Leaf.
Don't talk to me, all right? Knock it off!
He was caught on camera in the locker room yelling at a reporter.
I misdirected my anger after the Kansas City game. I was extremely disappointed in my performance, and I let it show.
He finished his time in San Diego 4-14 as a starter with 13 touchdowns and 33 interceptions. His passer rating was 48.8. Peyton Manning went on to win 5 MVPs and 2 Super Bowls while making the Hall of Fame. Meanwhile, Leaf never played after the 2001 season. For the Chiefs' most disappointing quarterback, we're going back to the 1983 draft, widely considered one of the best drafts in NFL history, with 6 quarterbacks going in the first round, including John Elway first overall. The Chiefs held the 7th pick. Jim Kelly and Dan Marino were still on the board, but instead they took Todd Blackledge from Penn State. Blackledge just won the national championship and seemed like the safe choice. But while Marino made the Pro Bowl as a rookie and threw for over 5,000 yards with 48 touchdowns in 1984, Blackledge couldn't even beat out Bill Kenny for the starting job. Over 5 years in Kansas City, Blackledge went 13-11 as a starter with more interceptions than touchdowns. I don't know if it was PTSD from that pick or what, but after that, the Chiefs didn't draft a quarterback in the first round until Patrick Mahomes in 2017. Next up is Art Schlichter, a 4-year starter at Ohio State who finished in the top 6 of Heisman voting 3 times. The Baltimore Colts took him 4th overall in 1982, but his career was over before it ever really began. The thing is, Schlichter had a gambling addiction. Before his rookie season ended, he'd gambled away his entire $350,000 signing bonus. And by spring of 1983, he'd lost $389,000 betting. The NFL suspended him for the entire 1983 season, making him the first player suspended for gambling in 20 years. That didn't stop him because he later revealed that he kept on gambling during his suspension. On the field, he was also a disaster, going a combined 0-6 as a starter. The Colts released him in 1985, and he spent years in and out of prison for theft, fraud, and drug use. Then we have Heath Shuler, who was Washington's 3rd overall pick in 1994. ESPN called him the 4th biggest bust in NFL history, which gives you an idea of how bad he actually turned out to be. And it went wrong right from the very beginning. He held out of training camp for 13 days until he got a 7-year, $19.25 million contract. I'll tell you something, missing training camp as a rookie quarterback is not a good idea and can seriously affect later progression. On the field, he was terrible, and his worst moment was in Week 7 against Arizona, where he threw 1 touchdown and 5 interceptions. The Redskins also drafted Gus Frerotte in the 7th round of that same draft. Frerotte moved the offense way better, and fans started chanting his name at home games. Shuler went 4-9 as a starter with Washington, throwing 13 touchdowns and 19 interceptions, and his completion rate was 47.7%, while his passer rating was 58.3. After getting hurt in his 2nd season, then getting benched in 1996, the team traded him to New Orleans for a 3rd and a 5th round pick. In New Orleans, he suffered a severe foot injury that ended his career, which involved crushed bones and torn ligaments. Shuler played just 4 seasons total. Now, the Cowboys have had their fair share of bad quarterbacks too, but I'm going to go with Glenn Carano being the most disappointing. They got him in the 2nd round of the 1977 draft, even though they already had Roger Staubach, so Carano was supposed to be a development guy for the future. It's just that he never developed beyond a backup role. Carano spent 6 seasons in Dallas holding a clipboard. He threw a couple of touchdowns in 1980, but didn't start a game until 1981. In that first start against Baltimore, the Cowboys won 37-13, but Carano went 7 for 18 for 51 yards, 1 touchdown, and 1 pick. That ended up being the last time he threw a pass in a game. A 2nd round pick is valuable, especially for a Super Bowl contender. That pick could have been a solid defensive lineman or a special teams guy who actually contributed. That is the risk you take in the NFL draft. You never truly know what's going to happen. Carano eventually moved on to the USFL and had some success, but in the NFL, it was just a wasted pick. And quickly guys, I want to ask, if you are enjoying this content, consider hitting that subscribe button, as we are almost at our goal of 50,000. Thanks to every single one of you. I appreciate all you watching. So let's continue. Next up are the Dolphins, and it was tempting to put Tua here, but he's had real flashes of greatness, and you never know, he could still bounce back. Even with the numerous concussions, his story might not be finished yet. So instead, let's rewind to 2007 when the Dolphins drafted John Beck in the second round. Beck was already 26 years old because he had spent 2 years on a religious mission before playing at BYU. That meant he was older than most rookies, supposedly more mature and supposedly more prepared. Miami's head coach at the time, Cam Cameron, compared him to Drew Brees and essentially staked his entire reputation on him. That comparison aged terribly. Beck started just 4 games as a rookie, and the Dolphins lost every single one of them. He threw 1 touchdown, 3 interceptions, and posted a 62.0 passer rating. The offense looked lifeless, and the confidence Cameron had in him disappeared quickly. The Dolphins fired Cameron after they finished 1-15, and the new regime had no loyalty to Beck, so he was buried on the depth chart and was eventually released. He was traded to Washington in 2011 and started 3 more games, but lost all of them, so his career record as a starter was 0-7. Next up is John Reeves, drafted 14th overall by the Eagles in 1972. Philadelphia was a disaster at the time, and Reeves was thrown straight into the fire. As a rookie, he started 7 games and lost all of them. He threw 7 touchdowns and 12 interceptions, learning the hard way what NFL defenses look like. Here is the part that says everything. He managed 1,508 passing yards that season, which ended up being the best statistical year of his career. He spent 3 years in Philly, then 4 in Cincinnati with the Bengals, before brief stops in Houston in 1981 and Tampa Bay in 1987, but he never found success anywhere. Reeves finished his time with the Eagles with a 44.9% completion rate, 7 touchdowns, 15 interceptions, and 0 wins. Chris Miller was not your traditional bust. In fact, at times, he was pretty good. Drafted 13th overall in 1987, Miller ran Jerry Glanville's run and shoot, or otherwise known as red gun offense, in Atlanta. He had a quick release, good mobility, and could throw a nice deep ball. In 1991, he made the Pro Bowl after throwing for 3,103 yards and 26 touchdowns. He even led the Falcons to their first road playoff win ever, beating the Saints with 291 yards and 3 touchdowns. But the next week against Washington, he threw 4 interceptions and 0 touchdowns. That was the pattern. Flashes of brilliance followed by inconsistency, and he dealt with a ton of injuries. He tore his ACL in 1992. Then after moving to the Rams, he suffered 5 concussions in 14 months. He attempted to come back with Denver in 1999, but suffered yet another concussion and retired. He finished his career 34-58 as a starter with a 74.9 passer rating. The talent was certainly there, but without consistent play, it's tough to leave a lasting impact on the league. Alright, let's move on to the Giants, and I really wanted to avoid picking Daniel Jones here, but since his time with New York is over and he was selected 6th overall, I just couldn't skip him. And don't get me wrong, Jones could still very well turn into a great quarterback for another team, although the journey is going to be that much tougher after he suffered a torn Achilles in 2025. But on the Giants, I don't even think Jones was that bad. There honestly just weren't many options to choose from in the Super Bowl era. As a rookie, the team only won 4 games, but he showed dual threat potential. He threw for 3,027 yards, 24 touchdowns, and 12 interceptions. The issue was ball security, as he lost 11 fumbles. His best year came in 2022, where he received some votes for Comeback Player of the Year, throwing for 3,205 yards and 15 touchdowns while tacking on 708 rushing yards and 7 more scores on the ground. New York even won the wildcard game against the Vikings that year, making it their first playoff win since the 2011 season. Riding that momentum, the Giants gave him a 4-year, $160 million extension, and that's where everything went downhill. He suffered a neck injury and then a torn ACL in 2023, which resulted in him only appearing in 6 games. When he returned, Jones went just 2-8 as a starter and became a free agent at the end of the year. Now he's on the Colts trying to recover from that torn Achilles, which will be an uphill battle. Okay, for the Jags, we are going with Blaine Gabbert. He was tall, athletic, and had a strong arm, but his 3 years in Jacksonville were a complete disaster.
KZ Kareem remains at a running back to play action. Gabbert looking to his right, under pressure, goes down at the 26-yard line.
He went 4-10 as a rookie, 1-9 in his second year, and 0-3 in 2013. During that stretch, he threw 22 touchdowns and 24 interceptions. To make things worse, the Jaguars drafted him one spot ahead of J.J. Watt, who went 11th to the Texans. Watt became one of the most dominant defensive players in NFL history. To be fair though, Gabbert did actually have a decent career as a backup. And the crazy thing is, he actually has 2 Super Bowl rings. One thanks to Tom Brady and one thanks to Patrick Mahomes. Then there's Zach Wilson, and we can all remember the hype with this guy. The Jets took him 2nd overall in 2021. He was coming off a huge season at BYU where he threw 33 touchdowns and only 3 interceptions. The thing is, his stock got inflated by one throw at his pro day. He rolled to his left and threw the ball 50 yards across his body to the middle of the field.
First of all, Steve mentioned, oh my goodness, that is just a silly throw.
It went viral and scouts started comparing him to Patrick Mahomes and Aaron Rodgers, and every now and then he did look good.
25-yard pickup, Wilson fires, there's Mims! He's got it!
But Wilson was pretty raw. He'd played against some weak competition in college and it showed in the NFL. Wilson went 12-21 as a starter for New York with 23 touchdowns and 25 interceptions. He played 3 years with the Jets, then became a backup in Denver before serving as a backup in Miami for the 2025 season. Andre Ware won the Heisman Trophy in 1989 after throwing for 4,699 yards and 46 touchdowns at Houston. In one game against SMU, he threw 6 touchdowns in a single half. So there was a lot of excitement about him coming into the NFL. The Lions took him 7th overall in 1990, which immediately caused a bit of chaos within the organization. Basically, head coach Wayne Fontes ignored his scouting director's advice and the guy resigned the next day in protest. Even with that, there were a ton of high expectations. I mean, they were pairing a Heisman winning quarterback with Barry Sanders. Doesn't get much better than that. But Ware just never adjusted to the NFL. In college, he was given a lot of oversimplified reads. The NFL was completely different. Faster defenses, more complex coverages, and he had to play under center. Over 4 years in Detroit, Ware only started 6 games, throwing 5 touchdowns and 8 interceptions with a 51.6 completion rate. The 7th pick could have been used on a defensive player or an offensive lineman. Instead, they got a Heisman Trophy winner who threw 5 career touchdowns. But you know what's worse than that? Drafting a first-round guy who never starts a single game. The Packers grabbed Rich Campbell 6th overall in 1981. He appeared in a few games but never proved that he was the future. In his rookie season, he played twice and got picked off 4 times while throwing 0 touchdowns. But his best moment came in 1984 when he led the Packers to a win over the Bears with 2 touchdown passes. And remember, these are the same Bears who would go on to win the Super Bowl the next year with one of the best defenses in history, so this was a legitimate accomplishment. But that was his only claim to fame. He finished his career with 386 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, and a 45.6% completion rate. After football, he joined the ministry and later worked in journalism. Alright, next is Jimmy Clausen, and this was a big one. He came into the 2010 draft with a ton of hype. The guy was awesome in high school and played in a pro-style offense at Notre Dame, which is exactly why Mel Kiper loved him, even ranking him inside his top 5. But on draft night, Clausen slid hard. Teams were worried about his arrogance and poor leadership, causing him to fall all the way to 48th overall. Kiper doubled down on TV, basically saying that if Clausen wasn't a success, he would retire. Clausen did get to start some games as a rookie, but he went a disappointing 1-9 with a 52.5% completion rate, 3 touchdowns, and 9 interceptions.
Clausen, and that may have been picked off.
There was one good thing about this whole mess though. He was so bad that the Panthers went 2-14 and got the 1st overall pick in 2011, which they used to draft Cam Newton, and let's just say that turned out a lot better. Clausen, on the other hand, finished his NFL career with just 1 win and was out of the league entirely by 2016. Next up is another epic fail from that 1983 draft class that we mentioned earlier. The Patriots had the 15th pick and Dan Marino was still on the board. Instead, they took Tony Eason from Illinois. Eason started 4 games as a rookie and they did not go well. He bounced back in year 2 though with 3,228 yards, 23 touchdowns, and only 8 interceptions. In fact, he even had the lowest interception rate in the league at 1.9%. He was okay in 1985 and the Patriots made it all the way to the Super Bowl. The trouble is they came up against the legendary Bears defense and were smoked 46-10. Eason is the only starting quarterback in Super Bowl history who didn't complete a pass. He went 0 for 6 with 3 sacks and a lost fumble before getting benched. he looked terrified, completely frozen. But in 1986, he did bounce back, throwing for 3,328 yards and 19 touchdowns, even receiving an MVP vote. But the pressure moments defined his career. He finished 28-21 as a starter with the Patriots and a 80.3 passer rating. And even though he's the most disappointing quarterback in Patriots history, according to this list, there were a lot of names that were worse than him. Like this guy, widely regarded as the biggest bust of them all, Jamarcus Russell. He was 6'6", 265 pounds, and could throw the ball 60 plus yards from his knees. Exactly the kind of guy who Al Davis wanted to have. Russell made a big mistake though, holding out of rookie training camp. This resulted in him getting a 6-year, $68 million contract with over $30 million guaranteed before taking a single snap. But then, per usual, everything fell apart. The guy was terrible. He went 7-18 as a starter with 18 touchdowns and 23 interceptions in 3 years. His passer rating was just 65.2. He held the ball too long, took unnecessary sacks, and could not read defenses.
Jamarcus Russell has, in fact, been released. The first overall pick of the 2007 draft.
You know, he's made his own bed, as my father used to tell me. Now he's going to have to lay in it.
It's the perfect example of a guy who had all the talent in the world, but just couldn't lock in the mental side of the game. And if you factor in his almost $40 million in career earnings with his 354 completions, he earned more than $100,000 per completed pass. Now, the Rams have had their fair share of disappointing quarterbacks, but we're going to go with Sam Bradford for this one. He was the last quarterback to get a massive rookie contract before the wage scale. The Rams took him first overall in 2010 and gave him 6 years, $78 million with $50 million guaranteed. The really frustrating thing is he actually looked good as a rookie. He won Offensive Rookie of the Year with 3,512 passing yards. But after a few years, his left knee gave out. He tore his ACL in back-to-back years, 2013 and 2014. Over 5 years with the Rams, he played in only 49 of a possible 80 games. The Rams were dysfunctional for sure, and the offensive line sucked. But it wasn't just that. When Bradford did play, he looked scared. He was too afraid to take chances or go for a deep shot downfield. His tenure with St. Louis finished with him getting 18 wins, 30 losses, and 1 tie while throwing for just over 11,000 yards and 59 touchdowns to 38 interceptions. After playing for a few other teams, Bradford eventually earned around $130 million in his career without ever winning a playoff game or making a Pro Bowl. Which brings us to Baltimore. After locking down every team on their way to Super Bowl 35, the Ravens had one of the best defenses of all time. The organization believed that they were truly one quarterback away from becoming a feared dynasty. So in 2003, they traded up to grab Kyle Bowler at 19th overall. Bowler was a combine warrior who could throw the ball 50 yards on his knees, but his completion percentage over 4 years at Cal was only 48.7%. A massive red flag the Ravens ignored. He started right away and did not look the part. He couldn't read defenses, panicked in the pocket, and fumbled a lot. Over his career with the Ravens, he went 20-22 as a starter with 45 touchdowns and 44 interceptions. After his time in Baltimore was up, he joined the Rams for 1 year going 0-4 and then was on the Raiders as a backup for 2 years. To make things worse, that 2004 first rounder they traded to New England became Vince Wilfork, who anchored the Patriots defense for a decade. Danny Wuerffel won the Heisman Trophy at Florida in 1996 and led the Gators to their first national championship. But scouts said he didn't have an NFL arm. His velocity was considered well below what you would need at the pro level. Mike Ditka didn't listen to any of that. He took him in the 4th round at pick 99. Unfortunately, Wuerffel's weak arm got exposed pretty quickly. Defensive backs would jump routes because they knew the ball would take forever to get there. He couldn't make the deep throws or fit balls into tight windows. Over 3 years in New Orleans, he went 2-4 as a starter. He completed 48.8% of his passes with 9 touchdowns and 16 interceptions. And just in case you're wondering why I picked a 4th round guy for the Saints, it's because my only other options would have been Archie Manning or Tyler Shuck. Then we're on to the Seahawks, and I'm going to go with Dan McGuire here. They took him 16th overall in 1991. The guy was 6'8" and 240 pounds, just an absolute unit. Seattle thought a guy that tall would be able to see over the defensive line perfectly, but to succeed in the pros, you need more than just height. McGuire's throwing motion was way too long and slow. He couldn't move his feet fast enough or escape pressure, and he was pretty much a statue in the pocket. He started 5 games over 4 years in Seattle. Over his career, he threw just 2 touchdowns to 6 interceptions with a 50% completion rate. To make things even worse, in 1992, the Seahawks offense was historically bad. They only scored 140 total points all year, just 8.8 per game. Next up is Mike Kruczek, drafted in the 2nd round of the 1976 draft, and he has some of the weirdest stats in NFL history. In 1976, Terry Bradshaw got hurt, the Steelers' starting quarterback. Pittsburgh was 1-4, and they turned to their rookie backup Kruczek. Kruczek started 6 games over the course of the season, and the Steelers won all 6, but he didn't throw a single touchdown in any of those games. He threw for 758 yards, no touchdowns, and 3 interceptions. The 1976 Steel Curtain defense is considered one of the greatest units of all time. After that 1-4 start, they allowed only 28 total points over the final 9 regular season games. That included 5 shutouts. Kruczek's job was simple: hand the ball to Franco Harris and Rocky Bleier, who both rushed for over 1,000 yards that year. Don't turn the ball over and let the defense do everything. Kruczek played 4 years with the Steelers, then 1 in Washington, but only actually started in 1 more game, which he lost. Some guys never get a shot, and for others, their bodies probably wish they never did, like David Carr with the Texans. He had a strong arm, was athletic, and had the occasional great moment.
Cowboys come with 4. Carr with time. Complete down to the 5. Diving for the end zone. Touchdown, Billy Miller!
But he was drafted into a nightmare situation. The Texans were an expansion team and brand new in 2002, so naturally their talent was minimal. Carr holds the NFL record for most times sacked in a single season, 76 in his rookie year. He also was sacked 68 times in 2005, which led the league. In fact, over 5 years in Houston, he took 249 sacks total. That physical beating just destroyed him. He started dropping his eyes at the first sign of pressure and bailing from clean pockets. He finished 22-53 as a starter in Houston with 59 touchdowns and 65 picks. You could actually argue his backup Dave Ragone was worse. Ragone was a 3rd round pick in 2003 who started just 2 games, losing both. He completed 50% of his passes for 135 yards, 0 touchdowns, and 1 interception. His passer rating was 47.4, and he only averaged 3.4 yards per attempt, which is insane. But considering Carr was the 1st overall pick, he had more hype and was more disappointing. The Titans took Jake Locker 8th overall in 2011. He ran a 4.5 40 time and had a rocket for an arm, but his accuracy wasn't great in college. The Titans hoped his athleticism would make up for that, but it didn't happen. The biggest problem was his body. Locker played aggressively and ran a lot, but he got hurt every single season. He dislocated his shoulder multiple times, had a severe foot injury that required surgery, and dealt with constant hip problems. By the end of 2014, he'd basically spent more time in rehab than on the field. Then in 2015, at age 26, Locker shocked everyone.
That breaking news has to do with the Titans and quarterback Jake Locker. He's retiring.
He said he had lost the desire to prepare for another season. In 4 years with Tennessee, he finished 9-14 as a starter with 4,967 passing yards, 27 touchdowns, and 22 picks. In 2011, quarterbacks were flying off the board early. Cam Newton went 1st, Jake Locker went 8th, Blaine Gabbert went 10th. The Vikings were sitting at pick 12 and felt the pressure, so they grabbed Christian Ponder from Florida State, even though a lot of scouts had him as a 2nd round guy. His rookie year was bad, a 2-8 starting record with 13 touchdowns and 13 interceptions. But in 2012, Adrian Peterson rushed for 2,097 yards and won MVP, so it took a lot of the pressure off him. The Vikings went 10-6 and made the playoffs. Ponder also looked a bit better, throwing for 2,935 yards. We've got to remember, Peterson was doing all the heavy lifting. Ponder's job was basically to hand the ball off and not screw up when he did have to throw. Unfortunately, he got worse in 2013 and was done by 2014. He went 14-21-1 as a starter, threw for 6,658 yards and 38 touchdowns with 36 interceptions. So that's every team's most disappointing quarterback. Some of these guys had elite talent but were destroyed by injuries or terrible organizations. Others just didn't have it. Let me know which pick surprised you the most in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe so I know to make more like this one.